She is studying the policy, trade policy, and she has studies in administration, and she has been an internship academy in the University of Lausanne in Switzerland, and she has been researching in the Instituto and working here and participation of negotiation of free trade agreements. Her presentation is about reducir la brecha de género en innovación en América Latina, aprendizaje desde el patentamiento femenino. So, Fernanda, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for the presentation. So I will present in Spanish, if it's okay for everyone. Bueno, mi nombre es María Fernanda Rojo-Fuente, yo me presentaba, y el día de hoy les presentaré sobre mi policy paper, reducir la brecha de género en innovación en América Latina, aprendizaje desde el patentamiento femenino. Para dar un poco de contexto acerca de la investigación, esta parte de la premisa de que la innovación es y ha sido a lo largo de la historia un motor fundamental para el crecimiento económico, pero sin embargo la subrepresentación de las mujeres entre las personas inventoras limita su aporte al desarrollo. En la actualidad, solo el 4% de las patentes internacionales fueron inventadas exclusivamente por mujeres, y siguiendo las tendencias actuales, la paridad no se lograría hasta antes del 2061, lo cual debería preocuparnos. Pasando al contexto regional, al realizar los estudios por región, uno podría quizás intuir que las regiones con mayor paridad podrían ser quizás América del Norte, Oceanía o Europa. Sin embargo, en un estudio hecho por la Organización Mundial de Propiedad Intelectual sobre las últimas 2 décadas, América Latina y el Caribe es la región que presenta la mayor paridad en patentamiento femenino. La región ha mostrado liderazgo con aproximadamente un 21% del total de innovadores, del total de inventores registrados. Sin embargo, la paridad no se proyecta adecuadamente hasta antes del 2068. Y surge la pregunta, ¿por qué esto es relevante como un problema público? Y aquí tenemos 2 principales razones. En primer lugar, la actividad patentadora y la invención presentan una asociación positiva con los niveles de renta per cápita, es decir, con el desarrollo económico. Y por otro lado, la subrepresentación del talento femenino en este ámbito limita la diversidad, la cantidad y la calidad de las inversiones que son finalmente, de las invenciones que son ejecutadas finalmente en tecnologías. Bueno, ¿cómo se desarrolló el estudio? Básicamente lo que se hizo fue revisar 6 variables principales. En primer lugar, la paridad de género a nivel general de los países de América Latina y el Caribe, luego la paridad en grados de STEM, es decir, ciencia, tecnología, ingeniería y matemáticas, la composición sectorial del patentamiento, es decir, la especialización tecnológica de los países, los entornos institucionales de innovación y las políticas públicas respecto a STEM y género y a cuidados. Ante la imposibilidad de revisar todos los países de América Latina y el Caribe, debido a su cantidad, se seleccionaron 5 países, que son Argentina, Brasil, Chile, Colombia y México, al ser los países con mayor participación femenina en solicitudes de patentes internacionales. El primer indicador es la patente a nivel, la paridad a nivel general. Los 5 países aquí investigados muestran una paridad a nivel general bastante alta. Todos están sobre el promedio mundial. Y por otro lado, podemos ver bastante en contraste que la paridad en materia de graduadas, en materias STEM, es bastante baja en los 5 países. Luego se revisó la composición sectorial del patentamiento, y esto se hace porque la especialización tecnológica de los países influye en sus niveles de inclusión de género. Y esto se debe a que campos como por ejemplo la química, la biotecnología, química de alimentos, farmacéutica, son áreas con mucha mayor inclusión femenina, Y hay otros campos, como por ejemplo las ingenierías, suelen tener una mucho más baja participación femenina, aunque sí son más intensivos en patentamiento. Por lo tanto, la especialización del país influye en sus niveles de participación femenina. Y como pueden ver aquí en el gráfico, coincide que estos países tienen porcentajes bastante altos de patentamiento en tecnología médica, productos farmacéuticos, química de materiales, sectores que podrían llamarse un poco más feminizados. Por otro lado, se revisaron los entornos institucionales de innovación y esto es relevante debido a que las mujeres inventan mucho más, patentan mucho más en el ámbito académico, es decir, desde las universidades, que desde el sector privado. Y coincidentemente en América Latina y el Caribe se patenta más desde universidades comparado al resto del mundo. Aproximadamente el porcentaje mundial es de un 3,8%, y como se puede ver en algunos países aquí en América Latina, esto es mucho mayor. Por ejemplo, en Chile, cerca de un 37% de las solicitudes son desde universidades, frente a un promedio mundial de un 3%. Luego se revisaron las iniciativas en materias STEM y género en la región, y lo que se encontró fue que específicamente los 5 países que cuentan con mayor paridad en la región en patentamiento también son los 5 países con mayor cantidad de iniciativas en materias STEM y género. Y finalmente, la última variable que se revisó fueron las políticas de cuidado. Se revisaron las políticas de cuidado de los 5 países y bueno, los resultados fueron en que en general lo que dicen los estándares internacionales es que no existe realmente sistemas integrales de cuidado. Más bien han habido algunos avances más puntuales. Sin embargo, no podríamos decir que sea específicamente el fuerte de la región o en estos 5 países. Y bueno, finalmente, para ir cerrando, porque no me puedo extender tanto, y porque esto es un policy paper, se generaron algunas recomendaciones de políticas para América Latina y el Caribe. En primer lugar, institucionalizar sistemas de monitoreo con enfoque de género en las oficinas de propiedad intelectual, incluyendo la casilla del género en las solicitudes de patente, por ejemplo. Esto se debe a que muchas oficinas ni siquiera tienen la casilla para incluir el género, y esto dificulta la obtención de datos. Y de igual manera se recomienda publicar diagnósticos nacionales que consoliden estos datos desagregados. Chile, por ejemplo, ha avanzado bastante en esta materia, sin embargo, no ha sido un avance igualitario en toda la región. Luego tenemos articular políticas integradas de STEM, innovación y cuidados, de modo que las trayectorias académicas y profesionales de las mujeres no se vean interrumpidas por las desigualdades en el trabajo doméstico y de cuidados. Y también tenemos fortalecer capacidades mediante mentorías y redes de mentoras, impulsando redes de apoyo que multipliquen la masa crítica de mujeres en el ecosistema de innovación. Y finalmente, generar financiamiento inclusivo en innovación, estableciendo fondos concursables y líneas de crédito con enfoque de género, y estructurar incentivos para animar a las empresas a fomentar la actividad de sus equipos en investigación y desarrollo. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, María Fernanda, y muy apegada al tiempo, entonces voy a aprovechar de hacerte una pregunta. Tal como se señaló en tu presentación, la brecha de género en el patentamiento no configura de alguna manera un asunto solo de representación, sino una restricción de potencial económico. En ese sentido, ¿de qué manera la subutilización del talento inventivo incide de alguna manera en la competitividad de América Latina en ese comercio global, y por qué las patentes parecen ser la clave para el desempeño del sur global?
Muchas gracias.
2 minutos.
Sí, ya, a ver. Muchas gracias por la pregunta. Yo diría que, bueno, sí que esa es la clave, es quizás bastante, pero de todas formas, sí son un indicador importante de innovación. Y la innovación es importante para el desarrollo económico y existe una gran posibilidad, existe un lugar donde la región podría desarrollarse en ese sentido. Esto incide en la competitividad de la región desde el punto de vista de que la subutilización de este talento implica pérdidas concretas de productividad. Por ejemplo, según ciertas estimaciones, de existir una mejor estrategia o de poder como cerrar esta brecha, digamos, al menos en patentamiento, podría existir un aumento del PIB per cápita de entre un 0,6% hasta un 4,4%, dependiendo del país. Por lo tanto, esto sí tiene un efecto económico que, de ser cerrado, podría ser aprovechado de mucha mejor manera si pudiéramos realmente utilizar este talento que no está siendo utilizado. Por otro lado, tenemos que las soluciones que tenemos son también mucho menos inclusivas, porque la mayoría de los inventores, por no decir todos, inventan soluciones a sus propios contextos. Por lo tanto, estar secado de alguna forma hacia ciertos grupos de personas, digámoslo, la mayoría son hombres, ellos se atienen a sus problemas o a su punto de vista. En cambio, la mayor diversidad también generaría una mayor variedad de soluciones tecnológicas también. Eso también se traduce en una ganancia económica y de desarrollo.
Muchas gracias, Fernando. Yeah. Our next panelist is Simonetta Sarilli. I hope to pronounce it very well. The name of the next presentation is Social Commerce in Developing Countries, Unlocking Opportunities for Women Entrepreneurship Amid Evolving Regulation. Simonetta is a leading trade analyst with over 30 years of experience in the United Nations system. Her work has focused on a wide range of trade and development issues. Simonetta is currently an advisor to the Asia Pacific Research and Training Network on Trade, ARTNet, and founding member of the WTO Gender Research Hub. In 2010, she launched the Trade, Gender, and Development Program, which she directed until her retirement from the organization in 2024. In recognition of her groundbreaking work linking trade and gender equality, Simonetta received the WTO's inaugural Gender Equality Pioneering Award in 2023. Simonetta, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Gracias. Muchas gracias para invitarme a esta conferencia. Yo veo que hay muchos amigos aquí, personas que conocí personalmente, personas que conocí en Zoom, en la pantalla. Entonces hay sorpresa. Por ejemplo, Dorotea pensaba que yo era muy grande porque solamente me había visto en la pantalla y me dijo, pero eres tan pequeña. No. Y un tan placer entonces estar en Santiago con tantos amigos y aprendiendo y viendo tantas personas jóvenes que se están poniendo en este tema que me alegra muchísimo. Entonces, yo le voy a hablar rápidamente de un tema que estoy investigando hace un año y medio, que es comercio social. Y me interesa este tema para el impacto que tiene sobre mujeres pequeñas emprendedoras. Y voy a hablar también un poco de lo que los países están haciendo para dar reglas al comercio social. Pero ahora voy a pasar al inglés. Entonces, so what is social commerce? We can say that in very broad terms, social commerce means to do e-commerce through social media platforms. We know, and the ITU has just released the new data regarding internet access, and so the data for 2025. And so there is a progression in the ability to connect with the internet, but still the geographical gap, so the development gap and the gender gap are there, and they are not closing. Now, at the same time, we have data regarding the access to social media platforms. And what we see is that a huge amount of people spend a huge amount of time daily on connecting to the social media platforms. So we are talking about WhatsApp, Telegram, LinkedIn, Facebook, all the social media platforms that we. And because this, as I said, the development and the gender gaps are still there, these social media platforms have become very useful instruments for women, micro and small entrepreneurs, especially in developing countries, to start doing in commerce online. So an instrument that was initially used for communication is increasingly used for doing business. Now, why are, so we know that, and we have data about it, that women are using social media platforms for business more than using the official e-commerce platforms. And this is across developing regions. And we also know that women entrepreneurs use social media platforms for business more than men. So the question is, why are they using this tool to do e-commerce? And there are basic reasons. First of all, because social media platforms are very easy to use. And since women were using it for social contacts, the gap to use them for business has been a kind of an easy jump. Then, because these platforms don't require any cost beyond the cost of being connected to the internet and having the proper device, that in most cases is a phone. And there are no requirements that are there in the case of the formal e-commerce platforms, like having a bank account, having a registered company, and the fees to be able to use the platforms. So in a way, because of being so easy and so inexpensive, these platforms have become a very the preferred tool for many women and small and micro entrepreneurs in developing countries. Now, what is interesting and what emerges from many surveys on this topic is that even having a small business through social media platforms means some incomes, and these incomes translate into a better position, better status within the family and the communities, and this in turn means more self-confidence. So there is a kind of link between this being able to do small commerce and in most cases domestic commerce, though there are also examples of cross-border trade. But so there is a link between this being able to do this commercial activities and having a better position and feeling better, let's say, in the community, in the social and economic life. Now, as always, there are two sides of the same coin. So, though I said that these are very easy instruments to use from a digital point of view, still there are you need a minimum of digital skills. And you need a minimum of skills to develop content to put on the social media platforms. Then orders can come every time during the day, and being women so taken by their household responsibilities, being at the same time online has led to cases of burnout and a high level of stress. Then, because the market entering this market is very easy, the other side is that it is a market that is very crowded. Women entrepreneurs tend to put on the market the same kind of products, so beauty products, crafts, clothes, and so there is a pressure of for prices to go down. And then the trap of informality, since you don't need to be a formal company for using social commerce, then the risk is to be trapped in this kind of small and informal business. And we heard this morning how bad is to, all the bad implications of being informal. So now let's see what the countries are doing, because this social commerce is growing. It is one facet of e-commerce that is really going very, very fast. And so it is still understudied. But some countries have started thinking, okay, we have to do something because this is growing. This has an impact on the growth, on the economic growth of the country. So, but may also have some negative implications. So, some countries are already saying, okay, let's see what we can do. But for the time being, we have only one country that has taken a very, very clear position, and this is Indonesia. Indonesia has legislations that was enacted in 2023 that says social media platforms can be used only for advertising and marketing products. If there is transactions taking place, this has to take place in proper e-commerce platforms, so platforms that are licensed by the Ministry of Trade. And so the reasons why this is happening, why Indonesia took this position, is because of the fact that there was unfair competition between those selling online and those selling offline, that there was a risk of imported products that were not meeting standards that were put on the market, and also a problem of tax evasion. So the idea is let's put the real transactions under the e-commerce formal platforms that are regulated by the law. Other countries are doing something that is not clear, and also the language is not clear. The language they are using in their legislation. So, and here I am entering into something that may appeal to the lawyers in the audience. So there is a kind of a first layer of legal uncertainty that is, if the rules, if the regulations on e-commerce don't mention social commerce, what does it mean? We can say it means that it's excluded because it's not mentioned, but we can also say it is included because by extension, because you can do business on the social commerce. So the two things, formal and informal, may fall under the same. But then there is another level of legal uncertainty. Is that there are some you can use a social platform just to advertising the products, to get in touch with the potential buyers, but then the transactions and the delivery of the products happen out offline. So for instance, you just once you have agreed on the products, the price, you send a bank account, and then the payment is done offline. There is also another way that you use the social platforms to do all the journey. For instance, so the payment is also done on the social platforms. When there are specific buttons like add to the cart or buy now. So this is also, we are talking perhaps about the two different things. And are the rules on e-commerce applying to all kinds of social platforms, or only in the case of social platforms are used to do the whole journey? And this, I don't have an answer, so I hope you will let me finding an answer. This, what I have presented is based on a paper I am writing, so All your comments may help me reaching a conclusion. And just the last point is that even if we say all the rules applying to informal e-commerce platforms apply as well to social commerce, there is a problem of enforcement, because being this business activity informal, how can governments really control it? For instance, how they can check that the products meet health and safety standards, for example, or how can they investigate the complaints? So there is a problem of enforcement, and the problem is if the rules of e-commerce are extended to social commerce, it means many more requirements for platforms owners, but also for sellers. And maybe this may create additional conditions, for instance, requirements on disclosure of the seller, consumer protection, data protection, all these regulations may make the whole environment, the digital environment of social commerce much more burdensome. And this may become an obstacle for women who have been able to leverage social commerce for income generation and for empowerment, and all of a sudden they may face kind of difficulties that may just make the whole thing too difficult for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Simonetta. And maybe in 2 more minutes. Thank you. Well, maybe in 2 minutes answer where social commerce could be meaningful discussed and what could facilitate for these discussions.
Okay, I think it can be discussed wherever. We are discussing it here, but since the meeting, the conference is organized by the WTO chair, perhaps let me focus on the WTO framework. And I think there are 3 forums where social commerce could be discussed. It has never been discussed so far, so this could be a new path. One is the work program on e-commerce. As you know, the work program on e-commerce is not meant to develop new rules. It's meant for discussions and for getting more knowledge. So it could be the appropriate place also because many discussions are taking place on digitalization, on digital gaps, etc. Another one could be, again, we referred a lot about it in the morning, the informal working group on trade and gender, that has in its work program for 2025 and 26 digitalization. And another one is the informal working group on micro and small and medium-sized enterprises. And especially, again, social commerce has never been discussed there, but the 2 working groups on trade and gender and on SMEs are trying to collaborate. For instance, they have collaborated on financial inclusion. So perhaps social commerce could be one topic on which they could collaborate, considering the relevance that it has. We have numbers about it, about micro and small enterprises. And as in many other topics, we need the data. And for the time being, the data we have are all coming from informal surveys conducted by universities, think tank, and we need more data from that could be collected by the platforms, the social media platforms, but also some questions about social media, social commerce could be included in the official surveys. For instance, the surveys on time use, on labor. So the surveys that all countries run periodically. So some specific questions on social commerce could be added in the official surveys to get a more clear picture, and so to have a good balance in the regulations, to avoid to overregulate the social commerce, but also not to let it proliferate outside all possible rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Simonetta. And our third presentation, they are joining us online, is Envisioning Nari, a framework for protection of indigenous women within the WTO regime. And we have Purva Sharma and Vasujit Dubey. Welcome, and the floor is yours. I don't know which one is going to start.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you so much for that introduction. Am I perfectly audible and visible to you?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Greetings, everyone. This is Purva Sharma and Vasujit Dubey, and we would be presenting our topic. If you would just give me a second, I would present my screen. Is my presentation visible to everybody?
Yes, we see it now.
Thank you. Okay, so greetings, everybody. We would be presenting on the topic Envisioning Nari, which is a normative framework for integrating indigenous women into WTO law. When we were conceiving this idea, I would just take a small amount of time to go into the context of how we came to this. Essentially, when we were doing field research from our university, we met a lot of indigenous women because we live in a state where a lot of population is of tribals, and so it is easier for us to communicate with them during our visits. And it is in one such instance that I met a woman who was creating some turmeric medicines. Now, we know turmeric as a spice or probably as a coloring agent, but what we don't know, or many of us don't know, is that it is essentially an antiseptic. So she was creating medicines out of turmeric, which is, of course, her traditional knowledge. Now, when I thought of it, I thought of the myriad medicines which are sold in the market. And so when this medicine reaches from where she's preparing them to by the time it reaches the consignment borders, we see that the medicine which she is selling of around 120 rupees, which is roughly more than $1, the amount of it or the cost of it increases manifold time by the time it reaches the consignment borders. And this tells us that the indigenous women who are creating such products and who have this traditional knowledge may not have been integrated into our supply chains or into our GVCs that equitably as they should have been. And therefore, this is where we conceived this idea. And this is how we would be going about it. So we have envisioned a framework which might integrate indigenous women better and more equitably within the paradigm of WTO law. And here we start. So first of all, we start by telling you what is exactly the present status of indigenous women. When we talk about indigenous women, or in general indigenous peoples, they form a very small, we think that they form a very small or amount of workforce. But when we see the data, we see that indigenous women amount to almost 19% of the rural female workforce. But only less than 3% of them are integrated into the formal export value chains, which tells us that there is a disparity. So they might have been doing very well nationally, where they may have been integrated very well nationally. However, when we talk about GVCs, they have a very little contribution. However, they have a lot of potential to be integrated. Another thing that we see is that there is an evidence of de facto discrimination. So we see that this somehow mirrors the GATT Article 3 Para 4 logic, which is essentially what was again reiterated in EC Asbestos. How we see that the framework or the rules may appear neutral on face of it. However, they are discriminatory because they are applicable equally to all facets of a population or a diaspora. So we see how indigenous women may not be able to come out of that discrimination purely because the rules are applied uniformly at all levels. Again, we see from OECD reports how there is an SPS and TBT compliance barrier. And again, we see that they are performing very good in certain areas such as NTFPs or textile of crafts. However, there is a lot of tariff competition post-liberalization, which has caused their integration to be a little slow or maybe not that effective. We also see that there is a digital access deficit, which is more than 55%, limiting their participation in e-commerce, as was also discussed in just the previous presentation. So we see how the present status of indigenous women does not look good. On paper, it doesn't look good. So imagine the state it would be in actuality. So we therefore realize that there is a need of their integration. It is a legal necessity at this point. And we have seen that there are certain multilateral arrangements present in the current legal regime, such as UNDRIP, which in Article 21 and 22 talks about a sort of a positive discrimination, if we take it into constitutional law sense, that there is a duty of special measures for indigenous women. So we see that it is urging national governments, but then integrating multilateral agreements or arrangements into WTO law is not easy and not practicable. So we try to develop a system which within the paradigm of WTO law would meet these demands, so that it becomes more inclusive procedurally. And we will see how without integration, whatever developmental risks or domestic risks or implementation risks persist, maybe the framework that we're proposing would be better able to solve it. We also see that there is a risk of indirect discrimination under SPS or TBT, like I just discussed. There is also a problem of systemic integration, which requires that trade rules should align with human rights duties. And this is ILC's fragmentation report, which has specifically highlighted the need for indigenous women and their participation in the GVCs. Apart from that, we see that integration would promote more equitable participation, and it would be what the WTO agreements have always asked us to nurture, which is that we always want to enhance the developing country participation. And by directly integrating a very important part of the diaspora, we are ultimately increasing the participation. And therefore, the need for integration of indigenous women becomes extremely pertinent. Therefore, we would be proposing our framework. So our framework is essentially named NARI, NAARI, which is basically an acronym that we've given. This framework, this word Nari, is essentially the Hindi translation for the word woman in English. So this means Network Advocacy Agreement for Regional Integration. Here we try to bring in certain principles, and we use the current WTO framework in order to bring certain sense of parity within this entire infrastructure. So we take a lot from GATT Part 4, which is basically the developmental chapter, which talks about how the needs of the developing countries have to be given some sort of prioritization. Whatever we could sum up in these 8 minutes, we're trying to do that. Again, we also look at WTO consistent plurilateral frameworks, which remains a little distant realization. However, if done, it would turn out beautifully. We also look at indigenous women-led production certification, which my co-presenter would be speaking about in detail. Over to you, Vasujit.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hola to everyone over there. I believe I'm properly audible. I'll just try to sum up what we are essentially doing. What is the final goal of the paper? The final goal is to ensure that there is an institutionalization of the process wherein indigenous women can actively participate in international trade, and that can happen via a framework that we are presenting, which is the NARI framework. Now, the NARI framework. Now, what is the problem that we are facing? As Purva has already mentioned, the problems that we were facing was that there was TBT and SPS compliances problems. That means it was not very comparative with the already existing institutions. So we had formed NARI. Now, NARI is really, it's not actually going against the TBT and SPS, as well as institutionalizing what we call as indigenous women participation. Now, the first prong of this NARI framework is about traceability and certification mechanisms, wherein we essentially ensure that there are certain labels put, and that traceability is there, so that we know that the product which is coming into the international market, that the product is coming from that product is coming from a group of indigenous women. That is there. Secondly, we also go for the traditional knowledge registers. Now, in India, we have a very important system which is known as traditional knowledge registers. Traditional knowledge registers entail the whole processes of traditional knowledges which is put. For example, the example which Purva gave, using turmeric as a medicine, that is mentioned. Nobody in the entire world, whether in Chile, whether in America, whether in Russia, nobody can copy anything which is not there in the traditional knowledge register. That is an intellectual property register which is created. Now, that we will be using. Now, indigenous women's products will be put on those traditional registers, and that is in accordance with TRIPS Article 7, 8 and 27.3. We'll also be going for national participatory councils, which ensure procedural parity. Now, this is also with regards to the US due processes logic. We'll be forming digital cooperatives, which is an inclusion under GATS Article 4. These digital cooperatives have women who can come in and participate together. And most importantly, we will be going for data systems that will enable safeguard invocations. Now, these data systems are essential because data so collected by these indigenous communities in third world countries such as India, that is not protected. Now, when we have a data system mechanism, this data will be collected and stored and will be further used. If you can come to the next slide.
1 minute to finish.
Okay, I'll just complete it. What are we essentially doing then? This NARI framework that we are essentially putting forth is it increases 240% increase in SPS notification. That was a problem. We are solving it. Now there is a TRIPS vacuum. We are solving it. There was low bargaining power between in the communities. We are trying to solve that as well. And via this, we are trying to solve the problems which are already existing by bringing in the NARI framework. If we come to the next slide. We are trying to solve it, as I have said earlier as well. Now, there were risks, and we are solving it. Because of the paucity of time, you just see it. I'm not reading it again. We can come to the next slide as well. Now, these are the risks that we have mitigated. NARI creates an objective criteria for preferential treatment. It reduces the SBS and TBT burden, as has been discussed by Purva. And then it provides data framework for enabling the article safeguards under TRIPS. And it also includes participation. What we are trying to mention is that indigenous women's participation in international trade is as important as their making. Because I give you a very small example in 30 seconds. I got to see a Jaipur pottery shop that is there in India. They used to say that they were making potteries for, say, export to South America and America, and they only get 50 rupees, whereas those potteries are sold in, say, about 2,000 or 3,000 rupees. Where does these thousands of rupees goes to? These goes to the middlemen. What we are trying to do is eliminating middlemen, trying to put regional integration and helping the people on the ground, the indigenous women on the ground, to have that money back into the system. And I'll just come to the concluding slide, the last slide, which is that if that system is created, and of course we cannot explain to you the whole system in the expanse of 8 minutes, but if that system is created, that system will ensure equity and participation. And this system, the most importantly, can be put in nations such as in South America, in nations which are, say, third world, Vietnam, Thailand, India, Pakistan, and which can also be implemented in first world, in European countries. This system, if we create in regional system as well as an international integration system, will help in indigenous women to go on. And that is all this system is about. Now, if anybody wants to have any specific questions regarding it, we will be happy to discuss. And I know it cannot be discussed in 8 minutes, but we tried what we could. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I didn't present Purva and Basuji. They are final year BA LLB candidates at the Master National Law University with a shared research focus on international trade, law, WTO framework, and emerging trade, climate, and digital economy interfaith issues. Their work includes research contribution at the Center for Trade and Investment Law, participation in advanced WTO-linked academic programs, and published scholarship with Thomson Reuters and Bloomsbury. I'm gonna let you my question now, but we are going to hear your answer at the end for the time in order to listen to the rest. How do we increase indigenous women's participation in the current WTO regime? How would you do it? So at the end, we are going to listen to your answer. Now we are going to hear Sidi Shakasha, I think I pronounced it well, case studies on regional approaches to gender-responsive trade facilitation measures, evident from Eastern and South Africa. Sidi Shakasha is an innovative and results-driven trade and gender specialist. She has 10 years of experience in public policy and human development with extensive expertise in sustainable and inclusive global trade, regional economy integration, trade facilitation, and gender analysis. Sidi has a proven track record in shaping and supporting inclusive, evidence-based trade policy solutions across diverse regional contexts. She previously served with the Ministry of East Africa Community in Kenya and the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics and UN Women Africa, focusing on trade and gender issues. Welcome to this panel. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. All protocols observed. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening from wherever you are. Thank you very much to the Institute of Development Studies of Chile for giving me this opportunity to present my research work. So without much ado, I will share my screen. So my research paper is actually on case studies on regional approaches to gender-responsive trade facilitation measures with evidence from Eastern and Southern Africa. And I was tackling actually two questions. The first question being, how do regional policy frameworks and initiatives within COMESA and ESC enhance women participation in cross-border trade? And the second question was, to what extent have gender-responsive trade facilitation measures been implemented by COMESA and ESC members or partner states? And in terms of methodology, it was based on secondary data collection methods that involved in-depth research of policy documents, independent evaluation reports, and also research of similar studies, including analysis of the COMESA and ESC policy framework, as well as quantitative analysis of the 2025 UN Global Survey on Digital and Sustainable Trade Facilitation database. Now, to give just a brief context of women's participation in cross-border trade in sub-Saharan Africa, we note that the informal cross-border trade has been a major characteristics of the African economic and social landscape. And this is based on a study by one of my fellow presenters, that is Zarili and Linoki. And 50 to 60% of the total intra-African trade occurs informally. And within the Eastern and Southern Africa alone, we see that women account for an estimated 70 to 80% of the informal cross-border traders. Now, despite representing a significant share of informal cross-border trade in many developing countries, we see that we have gendered constraints in cross-border trade, this being underrepresentation of women, informal trade systems and decision-making bodies, high transaction costs, harassment of women at border posts, and limited access to information on customs and border regulations. Now, I want us to delve deeper into the global implementation of trade facilitation and women measures in various regions. And as you can see that according to the UN Digital and Sustainable Trade Facilitation database, we see the global average rate is at 45%, with the South and East Europe Caucasian region leading at 59%. However, I want you to focus on the developed economy, which is at 37%. And we see also a very interesting trend that sub-Saharan Africa has surpassed the global average of 47%. So then you ask yourself, why do we have this anomalous trend? And from this study, we can see that gender-responsive trade facilitation measures may not even be prioritized, even in countries with otherwise advanced trade system. revealing that there's a broader shortcoming in mainstreaming gender consideration into trade policy frameworks. Now, to answer my two research questions, based on the first question on regional policy frameworks and initiatives that enhance women participation in trade, especially in COMESA and EAC region, we see that both regions have a gender policy. They also have a simplified trade regime, and also they have the one-stop border posts, and also have women and trade programs, with the ESC having established also resource centers at the border crossing areas. Now, when you zoom into the simplified trade regime of the COMESA region, we see that they have 4 specific key tools for implementation of this regime. And the first one being a common product list, which allows member states to negotiate bilaterally and also have a threshold of a maximum value of USD 2,000 and a simplified custom document for use of import and export clearance. And they also have trade information desk officers, which are also known as TIDO. And when you look at the ESC region, they also have a similar setup. But for the ESC, they have negotiated a single common list that is used by all the partner states. And they also have, instead of a customs document, they have a certificate of origin, and they also have trade information desk officers. And based on these tools, the ESC STR, or one-stop border posts, and the trade initiative that are currently in place, when you look at the evaluation reports and similar studies that have been done, the study summarized some of the notable achievements to date. We see that there's an improvement in clearance time at the border post from 2 to 3 days to a few hours along the border post. And also there's been an increased number of women traders using the formal border channels. And this has led to a 34% reduction in incidences of gender-based violence experienced by women at the cross-border traders. We've also seen increased representation in joint committees, especially at the borders of Katuna, Malaba, Busia, and Mutukula, and even increase in revenues by women cross-border traders. That is over 100% increase. And moving on to the second research question that tackled on the state of implementation of trade facilitation and women measures, I'd like to note that here the main focus was on the 3 indicators. And this is trade facilitation policy or strategy for women implementation participation. The second indicator was on trade facilitation measures benefiting women and women membership in national committees on trade facilitation. Now, let's have a look at the regional implementation, the continental representation of these measures. How does the Africa region perform? As you can see, overall, there's a moderate progress, but uneven implementation across the region. We see the Eastern Africa region is leading at 54.6%, followed by Southern and the Central region. However, we see that there is an outlier, that is North Africa, with the lowest implementation at only 24.1%. And there's also a reason for this, which I will explain much later. Now, moving on to the 2 specific regional blocks, that is the COMESA region. Here, I just highlighted, selected 6 countries based on the database analysis. I was limited. I could not select more than 5. So as you can see, the figure illustrates a comparison of implementation of these 3 indicators. And you can see that the graph reveals wide variation of trade facilitation and women measures across the COMESA countries. The leading country here, we see Rwanda. No. Rwanda has, when you look at the triangle, it has a full triangle that is in orange. So that is full implementation in terms of a strategy for women participation, trade facilitation measures benefiting women, and women membership in national committees on trade facilitation. However, we also have other countries such as Uganda, which exhibits steady implementation, while Malawi and Zimbabwe, it's a mix of full and partial implementation. Now, let's have a look at the ESC member states, still focusing on the three indicators. We see that still Rwanda is leading, followed by Rwanda and Tanzania are actually leading in implementation of the three indicators at 100%, while Burundi is indicating progressively weaker implementation. When you look at South Sudan, we also have a mixed performance with some performing at 66.7% and 33.7%. So in conclusion, overall, we can say that attention directed towards gender-inclusive policies in trade facilitation continues to be insufficient, despite their critical role in inclusive development, and that the regional disparities reveal that gender-responsive trade facilitation is shaped by a combination of institutional capacity, regional policy frameworks, women's role in trade, and donor engagement. I will also like to add also the political will. And we also see that regions where women's role is trade are less visible, or where gender is less integrated into these policy systems, lag behind considerably in the implementation of the three indicators that I've just highlighted. So the key recommendations for this policy paper, first, towards the policymakers and regulators, it is to promote women active participation in trade facilitation, decision-making, especially in mainstreaming gender into NTFC. And the second is to encourage production analysis of gender disaggregated trade data to ensure inclusive evidence-based policymaking. And for the private sector is to continue advocating for gender-responsive trade policies and support women traders in understanding trade procedures through capacity building and training. And development partners is to partner with support and women, to partner and support women projects, and to fund and facilitate development and implementation of these projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sibi. And the question for answer at the end of the rest presentation is, what can regional approaches in Eastern and South Africa teach us about effective gender-responsive trade facilitation? What can we learn and how to move forward with other regions? What are the lessons learned? So at the end, we are going to listen to your answer. And now we are going to hear Amanda Elam and Tatiana Monolova. They are over there. The presentation is Women Entrepreneurship in Export Countries, the Digitalization and the COVID-19 Shocks. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Can you see your slides?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, Tatiana, would you like to launch?
Yes, thank you very much for having us. It's a real pleasure to be participating in this panel. I'm Tatiana Monolova, a professor at Bentley University in Waltham, Massachusetts, United States. And this is a paper co-authored with Amanda at Babson College, who will also present the data and the findings from the project, and Linda Edelman at Bentley University, Candy Brush at Babson College, and Mahesh Joshi at Hood College, all in the United States. The motivation for the paper is was to look at the very complex interaction between gender effects, internationalization, export entrepreneurship, and digitalization, and all augmented through the shock of the COVID pandemic. So that was the major idea of the paper, and I'll try to talk about the three pillars, if you will, of our argument and what we were looking at in this study. So as was already highlighted multiple times during the panel, export entrepreneurship is a key driver of international GDP growth around the world, and also linked to reduction in gender inequality, so extremely important. Sadly, not enough attention, in our opinion, has been given on the part of academic scholars to this phenomenon and its dynamics. And women are generally very interested in started export-oriented businesses. Studies show that 1 in 4 export-oriented new ventures is started by a woman, and as we heard just now, women continue to face a lot of barriers to participating in export trade, from physical security, constraints in mobility, to all kinds of institutional, regulatory, and cultural biases, limited access to information, limited access to important networks that would promote export and generally internationalization. And these effects were, of course, exacerbated by the pandemic. So here comes digitalization, which offers important benefits to women in leveling the playing ground, democratizing internationalization, offering a lot of tools that can be creatively used, as Simonetta just told us, creatively used by women in accelerating their businesses, finding new ways to create value and connect with their customers, etc., etc. And during the pandemic, actually, we found that women offset their potential losses, better than men did, using digital tools, infrastructure, and frameworks. Of course, the benefits of digitalization vary to a large extent on the types of tools that are being used and the extent of use of those tools, as well as the national context, generally economic, as well as digital, as well as in terms of the export development of the country. And the difference in tools being used, of course, is driven by the sector, the industrial sector, and the size of the business. We are academics, so we like to have a theoretical grounding of our research. For us, digitalization is a form of adaptive capacity, referring to the skills, the resources, and strategies that individuals and organizations use in response to buffer against and in response to environmental and socioeconomic changes, and looking at what structural inequalities and gender biases might still remain in terms of the export regime or the overall institutional framework in a country. So, to summarize the preceding discussion, in this paper, we look at one big overarching question, which is how does the level of export orientation of a country influence the effect of digitalization on preserving the sales level of the business at the height of the pandemic. So Amanda will talk about our data. We are looking at the change in sales between 2019 and 2020. How did digitalization help or didn't help to offset potential losses, or maybe even boost the level of businesses with using creative use of the opportunities presented by the pandemic? And how did that all vary depending on the level of export orientation of the country? We formulated 3 predictions, 3 hypotheses that we tested. Our first expectation was that export-oriented economies will see heavier impacts on those year-on-year sales changes for entrepreneurs, particularly for women. We also expected that export-oriented economies will see higher rates of digitalization as a form of adaptive capacity, resilience to offset those adverse shocks coming from the pandemic. If all of that is true, then we wanted to see in finer grained detail these relationships depending on the level of export orientation of the country. So I'll turn off to Amanda to walk us through the data, the tests, and the findings.
Great. Thank you, Tatiana. And I know we're short on time, so I'm going to go quickly through this. But our primary data source was the Future of Business Survey data. We pulled the data for December 2020. We had over 50,000 business leaders, respondents. So these are digital, right? People who are already digital. And we had data for 107 countries. And we pulled our country measures from the World Bank Euromonitor databases for 2020. Our sample in general shows among the countries about almost 1 in 3 are considered high. Most are in the middle. And we have about 28% who qualify as low export. And we suspected that export orientation was going to correlate with national income. And that correlation was actually only around 40%. So it was much lower than we expected. The business leaders were all ages and again, very digital. Their education levels tended to be strong. So higher education, more digital. Firms tended to be very small and early stage. Again, Facebook, we're looking at MEs, so 80% were micro and 1/3 were less than a year old. And we saw strong signs of resilience and digital uptake. So 50% had stable or growing sales in this peak of the pandemic, and about half were adopting new digital technologies. For our results, our first hypothesis was partially supported. We found that high export economies were actually harder hit in terms of year-on-year sales, which is a little bit contrary to the narrative at the time where everyone was worried about developing economies. We would explain this because you just have a higher portion of really large businesses, and the restrictions hit harder in the markets outside of informal operations. Also, it's important to understand that in this data, we're at the peak, and we know there was a rolling impact. So a lot of the developing economies and rural areas in particular didn't see impacts until later in the pandemic. Women generally reported higher losses. Gender differences were largely explained by controls. So not about being male or female, more about the type of business, the type of industry sector. Hypothesis 2 was also only partially supported. High export economies showed lower levels of digital tool adoption. And we think that's because digital tool use was already pretty well established in these economies. Women overall were more likely than men to report new digital tool use during the pandemic, but at higher rates, actually in low export and low income countries, especially e-commerce tools. So I think that again confirms what the reports were, that in more developing economies, there was a big push towards digital tools as a means of connecting with the marketplace, primarily around communications and e-commerce. Our third hypothesis was also partially supported. Digital tool use was positively associated with year-on-year sales. Controlling for export level actually increased the negative impacts for women. So in higher export economies, women didn't have the same gains as they did in lower export economies. And then women in lower export countries experienced some of the greatest impacts on year-on-year sales, controlling for digital tool use and other controls. So I think the takeaway from this is that these findings are all over the place. We really, I think from a policy perspective, need to better understand very specifically what's happening with firms focused on export business, because these were across all firms. And so with the level of export activity can vary quite a bit, and we know women are underrepresented. So again, high export context exposed new and small businesses to heightened disruptions. We're not surprised by that. Digitalization mitigated the negative effects of the pandemic on export activity generally, less so for women. Digitalization was an important source of adaptive capacity for all firms, but particularly important for women, businesses in high-income countries. So I'm going to stop there. That's our last slide.
Tatiana and Fernanda, and the question for you for later on will be, what role does digitalization play in helping women entrepreneurship to transcend barriers to internationalization? And our last panelist, the most important, of course, is Camila Flores. Camila is going to talk about política comercial, revisiones de género en los acuerdos comerciales y de inversión. Y Camila, si te puedes presentar.
Thank you, Gerald. Gracias, Gerald. ¿Está aprendido?
Sí, ya te...
Bueno, mi nombre es Camila, trabajo en el Servicio Exterior de Chile. Hoy día también estoy como académica acá en el Instituto de Estudios Internacionales. Muchas gracias por recibirme, muchas gracias por la invitación. Bueno, muy agradecido. Quisiera comenzar con un planteamiento simple, decisivo y que en la actualidad se suele dar por sentado, y es que el comercio y la inversión no son neutros, adquieren. Ya esto mucha gente acá presente lo sabe, de hecho lo aprendí de varias personas acá presentes, en Rita, Simoneta, gracias y paciencia también con lo que viene. Y es que, como estaba diciendo, tenemos la fortuna de contar con diversas voces presentes en este congreso. Alicia Proman estuvo acá también, la embajadora Bosa, muchos otros que por largos años sembraron las semillas para que hoy podamos afirmar con datos, estadísticas y hechos concretos lo que hoy nos reúne a dialogar. Como ya sabemos, los patrones de inserción internacional tienden a concentrar a las mujeres en segmentos más precarizados de las cadenas de valor, con menor acceso a empleos de calidad, a financiamiento, a tecnología y a espacios de decisión. Esto significa que las reglas del comercio internacional pueden contribuir a ampliar dichas brechas o, al contrario, convertirse en una herramienta para mitigarlas. Aceptando esta premisa, la política comercial deja de ser un ámbito técnico separado de las discusiones sobre igualdad y pasa a ser un espacio donde las cuestiones de género son ineludibles, tanto para el desarrollo económico como para el ámbito político-social de los espacios que habitamos. Ahora, ¿qué fue lo que se propuso en este estudio? El estudio en sí se organiza en torno a tres preguntas muy concretas. ¿Qué tipo de disposiciones de género se han incorporado en los acuerdos comerciales e instrumentos vinculados a la inversión en América Latina y el Caribe? ¿Qué tan operativas son las previsiones que ya existen? Es decir, ¿qué institucionalidades crean? ¿Qué recursos movilizan? ¿Qué mecanismos de seguimiento contemplan? ¿Cómo se articulan? Y si es que lo hacen, con las políticas nacionales en materia laboral, productiva y de cuidado. La intención de este estudio no fue solo describir el texto de los acuerdos, sino también poder evaluar si es que los compromisos dispuestos en ellos tienen una capacidad real de transformar algo más allá del papel. Si miramos el panorama regional, se observan algunos elementos compartidos, ¿cierto? Por un lado, América Latina y el Caribe se ha convertido en un espacio donde los capítulos y cláusulas de género ya no son una novedad. De hecho, hoy por hoy, como ya saben, múltiples acuerdos comerciales aparecen referencias explícitas a la igualdad, al empoderamiento económico de las mujeres, cooperación en estadísticas, apoyo a empresarias y participación en cadenas de valor. Sabemos que la OMC identifica más de 300 instrumentos comerciales que incorporan de manera explícita políticas de género, lo que ya, por supuesto, demuestra que no son casos aislados. Y múltiples acuerdos ya contienen referencia a igualdad, empoderamiento y cooperación. Por ejemplo, el Tratado de Libre Comercio Chile-Uruguay, ¿cierto?, del 2016, que contiene el primer capítulo de género y comercio en América Latina y el Caribe. El acuerdo de modernización de la Unión Europea con Chile, que contiene el primer acuerdo de bloque con un capítulo dedicado a comercio e igualdad de género. O el que tiene UNCA con México, que incluye una disposición sobre discriminación en base al sexo en su capítulo laboral, entre muchos otros. Este solo hecho, que hoy parece casi natural, hace no muchos años era impensable. Por lo mismo, la presencia del tema en este tipo de mesa y la mesa de negociación comercial es en sí misma un cambio cualitativo y un logro no menor, que no podemos dar por sentado. Sin embargo, y de forma paralela, cuando entramos al detalle, podemos apreciar que el lenguaje predominante en estos textos tiende a ser de cooperación y buenas prácticas. Abundan los verbos promover, fomentar, intercambiar, y son mucho menos frecuentes las obligaciones formuladas de manera precisa, con metas verificables, plazos o consecuencias en caso de incumplimiento. En la práctica, esto se traduce en comités, puntos focales y planos de trabajo que, si bien aportan mucho desde sus veredas, dependen fuertemente de la voluntad política y de la disponibilidad de recursos, más que en compromisos exigibles. En este sentido, y dentro de nuestro contexto regional, ciertos procesos de negociación continúan siendo importantes para abrir espacio a la agenda de género en acuerdos donde históricamente no se había tenido cabida. En los últimos años, por ejemplo, acuerdos bilaterales y modernizaciones firmados con países de la región con socios extrarregionales y diversos, como el acuerdo entre Perú, Chile y Singapur, en el marco de la Alianza del Pacífico, han incorporado capítulos o disposiciones específicas de género que antes sencillamente no existían. A mayor abundancia, en negociaciones recientes de Chile con Paraguay y en textos acordados, aunque todavía no vigentes, con México y con Emiratos Árabes Unidos, la temática de género entró a la conversación y quedó recogido en el resultado final. Por tanto, más que presentar esto como una serie constante de hitos, lo que nos interesó destacar es que en estos procesos hubo equipos negociadores que supieron aprovechar ventanas de oportunidad para plantear el tema, insistir en él y demostrar que podía integrarse en la arquitectura comercial global sin bloquear las tratativas. Esa combinación de oportunidad política y trabajo técnico explica buena parte de los avances que gozamos en la actualidad. Si una toma de distancia, se podría decir que la región ya fue capaz de construir una primera capa de institucionalidad en comercio y género. Ya contamos con capítulos específicos, referencias transversales en otros capítulos, comités bilaterales, mecanismos de diálogo y agendas de cooperación. Consecuentemente, hoy podemos afirmar que esa primera capa tiene un mérito indiscutible, ya que le da visibilidad y legitimidad a la idea de que el comercio debe conversar con la igualdad de género. También permite que se reúnan autoridades de comercio, de género, de trabajo, de producción en torno a la misma mesa y meta común. ¿Cuál? El desarrollo sostenible, el cual hoy por hoy genera un lenguaje compartido. Sin embargo, y no obstante lo anterior, esta arquitectura sigue siendo frágil. En la mayoría de los casos, no hay financiamiento estable asociado a los compromisos, los indicadores son difusos o inexistentes, la información sobre implementación no siempre se sistematiza ni se hace pública, y las disposiciones de género suelen quedar fuera del mecanismo de solución de controversias. Esto crea una brecha entre lo que se declara en el texto y lo que efectivamente cambia en la práctica. Respecto al ámbito específico de los tratados de inversión, la presencia de género es todavía más limitada y, si es que llegan a existir, las referencias suelen ser muy ambiguas y grandes, en sentido de género. Con todo, hay experiencias interesantes a nivel de las agencias de promoción de inversiones. El caso de Costa Rica, que Gerald y Rosemary conocen muy bien, se han incorporado metas de participación laboral femenina y herramientas de acompañamiento a las empresas que reciben inversión, buscando que la atracción de capital vaya de la mano con la creación de empleos de calidad para las mujeres. Este tipo de ejemplos demuestran que incluso cuando los textos de los tratados avanzan lentamente, sí es posible introducir criterios de género en la práctica del día a día de política económica y de la gestión de inversiones. Ahora, a partir de todo lo anterior, el diagnóstico igual termina siendo un poco matizado. Por un lado, hay motivos para mirar el proceso con cierto optimismo. La agenda de comercio y género dejó de ser marginal, se ha instalado en las negociaciones y hoy existe una base normativa e institucional desde el cual podamos seguir construyendo. Pero por otro, persiste una distancia evidente entre esa visibilidad política y la capacidad de las disposiciones para generar transformaciones estructurales. Consecuentemente, cerrar esa brecha exige varias cosas a la vez. Primero, traducir los compromisos de cooperación en políticas con recursos y responsabilidades claras. Segundo, conectar de manera más explícita los capítulos de género con reformas laborales, productivas y de cuidados. Mejorar la disponibilidad de datos desagregados y los mecanismos de evaluación. Y, en la medida de lo posible, explorar fórmulas que permitan dotar de mayor fuerza jurídica a ciertos compromisos sin perder el realismo político. Por tanto, nuevamente, nos quedamos en este diagnóstico que termina siendo ambiguo. Es innegable que se ha avanzado, incluso hoy día, con todas las cosas que están pasando, que la vamos a estar en general. Es difícil imaginar una agenda de comercio moderna que no mencione al menos una vez la palabra género. Ese cambio simbólico importa y no poco. Al mismo tiempo, la arquitectura que hemos construido cuenta con espacios de mejora. Los capítulos y clases de género conviven con regímenes comerciales e inversionistas que permanecen prácticamente intactos en su lógica de fondo, y el riesgo es que el género termine funcionando como un adjetivo decorativo, que legitima acuerdos sin cuestionar realmente qué modelo de inserción económica están promoviendo, ni quién gana y quién pierde con ese modelo. El punto crítico es ese. Si la agenda de comercio y género no se conecta con la discusión sobre poder, sobre distribución y sobre modelo de desarrollo, puede terminar administrando desigualdades en lugar de transformarlas. Con esto en mente, más que cerrar con un mensaje autocomplaciente, me gustaría dejar diversas preguntas abiertas. Es decir, si aceptamos que el comercio y la inversión no son neutros al género, ¿es suficiente con añadir capítulos de cooperación y comités? ¿O necesitamos revisar de manera más incómoda las reglas que estructuran el sistema, los incentivos que genera y los silencios que mantiene? Lo que tenemos hoy en nuestra región es una primera capa. Importantes enunciados, algunos espacios institucionales, experiencias valiosas que muestran que otra forma de hacer política comercial es posible y también muy necesaria. Sin embargo, esa capa todavía no logra garantizar que las mujeres participen en mejores empleos con mayor voz y con mayor poder de decisión en las cadenas de valor. La invitación entonces es a usar esta agenda no solo para agregar párrafos a los tratados, sino para abrir debates más profundos sobre qué tipo de integración económica queremos y para qué la estamos construyendo. Si el comercio va a hablar de igualdad de género, que no sea solo para pronunciar bien el discurso, sino para aceptar las preguntas difíciles que esa palabra trae consigo. Muchas gracias.
Y si les parece, voy a empezar con las preguntas que estaban pendientes, pero al revés, entonces no te voy a dejar de última, sino que voy a aprovechar hacerte la pregunta y iniciar con tu última intervención. ¿Cómo pasar de esa letra, ¿verdad?, para que no sea letra muerta, a realmente acciones en esa construcción también de indicadores? ¿Verdad? Es decir, tenemos la importancia de los acuerdos, tenemos el tema de género, en algunos casos incorporados, hay algunas previsiones, pero que en la práctica a veces no parecieran tan reales o no las hemos medido también. Entonces, de tu experiencia, ¿cómo construir esa evaluación? ¿Qué indicadores podríamos empezar a trabajarlo? Porque al no estar incorporados muchos de esos capítulos en el mecanismo de solución de controversias, al final es como no tener dientes, ¿verdad?, para poder hacer esto un poco más aquí. Y sé que tal vez la pregunta te la pongo tal vez difícil, pero creo que, como decías, hay que empezar a incomodarnos y empezar a pensar un poco también en cómo avanzar a partir de esto que tenemos. Entonces,
bueno, muchas gracias, Gerald. Efectivamente, una pregunta que yo creo que cualquiera de acá ha tratado de responder de alguna forma u otra, ¿cierto? Es una pregunta amplia que requiere quizás respuestas concretas que hoy día no cuento con la capacidad de responder con una sola respuesta. Yo creo que cada actor del comercio internacional puede aportar desde lo que puede. Entonces, por ejemplo, lo que estamos haciendo acá, teniendo esta conversación, haciendo estas preguntas, teniendo a Simonetta al lado, Amrita aquí también presente, Judith también, invitar a nuevas generaciones a involucrarse en este tema ayuda también porque por lo menos se pone el tema sobre la mesa y eso de alguna manera u otra ha ido impulsando los cambios de los cuales hoy día podemos gozar. El hecho de que yo tengo hoy día 32 años y puedo hablar de esto y me interesa, quiere decir que todos los papers que ustedes escribieron sí se han leído. Y muchas gracias también.
Gracias, Camila. Tatiana y Amanda, I'm going to remind you the question. The question was, what role does digitalization play in helping women entrepreneurship to transcend barriers to internationalization?
Okay, well, thank you. I think our research suggests that digitalization is very helpful at the country level. But the impacts tend, sorry, there's a little feedback. The impacts tend to be experienced more often by men than by women. And we think that digitalization in general is really helping the more educated, businesses that are more established, and that we need a lot more research understanding how those digital tools are beneficial to export entrepreneurs, particularly to women entrepreneurs. And I think that has important implications for policy, in that there are blanket programs being established advocating for education around how to become more digital, how to adopt specific tools. There's a big push for AI right now, but those applications and those tools will be of different interest to different kinds of businesses. I think the pandemic gave us sort of this mini laboratory to really study this shift to digital practices. And I think the final takeaway is that if we can find effective programs targeting more vulnerable entrepreneurs, smaller businesses, younger businesses, informal businesses, that they will have an outsized impact on those entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Amanda. I don't know if Tatiana would like to add.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I also believe, seconding what was just articulated, that we also have a responsibility as researchers. So this morning, as Amanda and I were getting ready for our presentation, we lamented the way some questions are being asked, so that there is huge surveys being launched and data being compiled and aggregated, but it doesn't really tell the whole story, and so it sometimes it doesn't give the complete picture at best. Sometimes it gives the wrong picture, which is even worse. So we have to be very careful about how we ask some of the questions and how we engage and include the populations and the groups of women that we really want to address and get involved. And so,
right. And for example, the Future Business Survey data and the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor data both ask, have you recently adopted a tool, or will you adopt one in the future? They don't ask, how many tools do you use today? So we know that, in more advanced economies, there's a higher level of resting digitalization, and we need that baseline data in order to interpret, the new actions people are taking.
Thank you for both of you. And Cindy, your question was, what can regional approaches in Eastern and Southern Africa teach us about effective gender-responsive trade facilitation?
Thank you very much, Chair, for your question. From my perspective and from the research findings that I've presented, firstly, I'd like to say we need to go beyond the WTO trade facilitation agreement measures and include the additional 3 that have been proposed by UNESCO in their survey, because they're very key. As you've seen that, especially when you look at the integration of women into NTFCs, having a trade policy or strategy for women participation, and coming up with trade facilitation measures that benefit women. in the East and Southern Africa region, what has mostly worked, I can say that the simplified trade regime has been a game changer, because we've seen the formalization of informal cross-border traders who mostly, most of the time, there's that perception that cross-border trade is cumbersome, all the procedures and all that, and they do not follow the formal processing or formal procedures. But with the implementation of the simplified trade regime, we have seen positive results. And also having like a one-stop border post whereby we have sanitary facilities and such as the basic infrastructure for health and environment purposes. So I would also like to say that especially for the case of ESC region, the simplified trade regime is one of the policy frameworks that I would propose other regions to adopt. And also having a gender policy in place, because as we've seen that all these two regional blocks have a gender policy in place, and ensuring that we continue producing and analyzing sex disaggregated trade data to advise on evidence-based policy making. And once we do that, then we will be able to achieve gender equity in trade. Thank you very much. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you, Phoebe. And finally, Orba and Sujit, we have a question from the audience. Could you explain again the NARI framework? What is the framework and how it works? And the question that we did at the beginning was, how do we increase indigenous women participation in the WTO regime? So with these two questions, you can answer, and then if we have time, we are getting some questions from the audience here.
Sure. So I'll go with the latter question first. How do we increase indigenous women's trade participation in international trade? Now, I heard speakers, very good speakers from the United States and other places. But then my work over here is to present the third world perspective to indigenous women. So we cannot really talk about digitalization until and unless we are able to sustain basic livelihood. And that is what indigenous women in India are about. So essentially, the NARI framework talks about first ensuring that there is participation in the international workforce. And that participation comes from one, capacity building programs, making registers, ensuring that there is regional integration, which is institutionalized internationally in the WTO regime, and ensuring that in this process, we are not actually breaking WTO law. Because what we have found earlier was that whatever frameworks we have that countries have tried to bring in, they were getting contrary to the established WTO norms. So essentially, the NARI framework doesn't go against it. And that was largely TBT and SPS reforms. Now, what is the NARI framework? Now, NARI framework, as Purva already mentioned, stands for Network Advocacy Regional Integration Programs. Now, essentially, these are programs wherein governments in the local governments, as well as at the national level, can implement certain programs and policy frameworks, including creating registries, having capacity building programs, ensuring regional integration and international integration, through which participation can increase. And the whole issue of middlemen coming in and extracting money and purchasing things in a very small value from the indigenous communities and then selling it in a very high value in the international platform, that decreases. And there is more proportionate share of the indigenous women. And that's a whole framework that we have made. And of course, we have tried to keep it as open as possible so that the local governments are also able to tweak certain policy tweaks, and they are able to comply more. Now, essentially what we are trying to do is to make it WTO compliant. And WTO compliant, we are trying to do it via the GATS agreement, which prioritizes developmental initiatives of the underdeveloping and the still developing economies. So to answer, in conclusion, the NARI framework is a framework to help indigenous women participate more via inclusive practices and better business capacities. Secondly, how do we improve their participation? We improve it via the framework that we have presented. Thank you. If Purva, you have anything to add on to this?
Just probably one thing, the reason why we need to envision such a policy in the first place is that currently and in general, WTO rules, or in general the norms that WTO have, they never ask the qualitative analysis of a rule. We never go into the qualitative normative capacity of a rule. That is never the inquiry before the WTO panels in general. So we are trying to bring in a framework where equity needs are also balanced and counterbalanced against the current established rules framework, which is a strict rule based framework. So we're trying to have some sort of balance over here in order to compete both the demands and have competing interest in mind of both the else everywhere. I think else everything is very much explained by Vasujit. This is just one point that I would like to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much for both. So we have a few minutes if somebody has a question from the audience. Rita.
Congratulations, such a fantastic, fantastic panel. Really, my mind is right now like filled with questions, and time is limited. So I'll go really quick. Camila, una pregunta para ti, ¿no? Cada vez ya sabemos que Chile es un líder cuando hablamos de la inclusión de incorporación de las cláusulas sobre las mujeres en los acuerdos internacionales. Y en mi investigación empírica, cuando estoy entrevistando los negociadores de muchos países, una pregunta que siempre me causa mucho ruido, mucho estrés, es ¿cuál es la evidencia? Ya tenemos tantos y ciento algo número de acuerdos que han incluido esas cláusulas, y Chile ha incluido muchos capítulos dedicados sobre género y comercio, pero ¿tenemos alguna evidencia ya que cómo la inclusión de un capítulo dedicado sobre este tema tiene un impacto, un cierto impacto positivo en las vidas de las mujeres? Entonces yo lo que te quiero preguntar es si ustedes en Chile han visto, han visibilizado alguna evidencia o un ejemplo de cómo la inclusión de esas cosas, de esos temas en sus acuerdos han ayudado a las mujeres, y que esa evidencia y esos ejemplos que nos pueden identificar nos van a ayudar en nuestra investigación. Y Simonetta, I have a question for you about the social media. You're super interesting. I've never thought about this intersection. So I was wondering, when you were presenting, besides the benefits that you mentioned, I think mobility is a big plus, right? So because lack of mobility is such an issue, one big challenge for women. And social media allows women to advertise without facing the problem of mobility. But then when we think about social media, which is not regulated, which is perhaps the biggest benefit of social media because it allows women to trade and advertise without facing the regulatory component or the regulatory hardships, which then become a challenge for them. It means that we are pretty much encouraging them to participate more in informal economy, isn't it? Because social media or advertising or selling your products through social media, I don't know if you agree, to me is a sort of participation in informal economy if it's not regulated. And if we think about informal economy, then we have to also think about the broader concerns, right? Not just the lack of regulation and regulatory incoherence, but also broader concerns, which one of which could be cyber attacks and cyber crimes and cyber harassment based on gender, based on abilities, based on disabilities. And one final comment or concern or question that I have for all the panelists of this fantastic, wonderful panel is, what do you think about whenever we talk about women, I think we're talking about women in a very heterogeneous manner, right? There are different women who are facing different challenges and different barriers in different countries and regions. So I really want to sort of hear your thoughts, a few reflections on when you talk about women and their challenges. A challenge that a woman faces in developing countries is not the same that a woman in developed country faces. A woman of color, a woman with disability. And if you combine all these factors together, a woman of color with a disability living in a developing country, gosh, you have like 4 marginalizing factors added to that woman. And the challenges are 4 times more or 10 times more magnified. So have you thought about these different or assessing the data that was being presented a while ago through these different channels or factors of marginalization is my curiosity.
Sí, bueno, muchas gracias Rita por tu pregunta. Efectivamente en Chile ya llevamos varios años hablando de este tema del comercio inclusivo, agregando nuestros acuerdos comerciales y tal. Y la pregunta no es primera vez que nos preguntan esto, ¿cierto? Como ya, pero llevan tanto tiempo en esto, ¿cuáles son los resultados concretos? Y de hecho este año tenemos la Secretaría de Relaciones Económicas Internacionales, la SUBREI, sacó su 7ª radiografía de la mujer exportadora. Por primera vez se presentan resultados concretos y medibles, ¿cierto? De cómo se estuvieron dando o las consecuencias positivas respecto del acuerdo que tuvimos con Uruguay. Entonces, y lo pueden encontrar también en su página web, en inglés y en español, por si acaso. Así que ahí pueden tener como números más concretos y claro, parte del desafío es que justamente, por lo que mismo mencioné, por la forma en que se verbaliza, la forma en que se escribe, las palabras que se utilizan, cuesta mucho conseguir algo ya quizás tan específico o concreto finalmente. Pero sí, este año justo tengo la fortuna de decir que sí, la 7ª radiografía de la SUBREI tiene datos concretos y la pueden descargar gratis en la página. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Amrita. I think you just, what you said is very true. And this is what, for this I said I don't have, this is a work in progress and then that I am doing. And so on one hand, you have this instrument that is allowed, has allowed women, micro, small entrepreneurs in developing countries to start a small business, but still a business that has given them incomes, but also a better status. And I ran a survey of the women small entrepreneurs in Ghana and Senegal. And this sense of empowerment, of respect, one lady told me, now I am invited when there are conferences because I have something to share. So this is very strong. On the other hand, you have all the shortcomings of having something that is informal, that is prone to abuse, to leakages of data, and also to tax evasion. So you have these 2 things. So if you overregulate, you risk of pushing women out of it, because then it becomes too cumbersome for them. If you don't regulate, then you have a kind of wide market in which everything can happen, language harassment, language, etc. So for this, I felt that would be so important to start discussing it. And so I mentioned some places in the WTO where it would be discussed. Otherwise, countries are going in all directions. So the only country so far that has been very clear is Indonesia. The others are using languages that is not clear. So the question mark is this rule applying to social commerce or not? So, and what would be the implications if the rules apply, or the implications if the rules don't apply? So I think it would be so important to have places where I have a meaningful discussion on this, because social commerce is growing really very, very fast. And on your questions, the different women in different places, what I have noticed that social commerce in developing countries is really an activity of women who want to reach the end of the month with some income and is linked to empowerment, etc. In developed countries, for instance, is I think that the students do. So it's a kind of a temporary activity, getting some money while being a student. So and is not linked to empowerment, to usually these are already empowered people. So it really changes the importance, the relevance, the social, not only economic, but the social implications vary greatly if you move from developed to developing countries. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Simonetta y a Camila. Por tiempo vamos a terminar acá el panel. Definitivamente ha sido muy interesante. Muchas gracias a Sidi, a Tatiana, a Amanda, a Purva, a Suji y por supuesto a quienes están aquí, a María Fernanda, a Camila y a Simonetta por este panel. Y a ustedes, creo que ahora ya seguiría el coffee break para que podamos empezar a tiempo con el tercer panel del día de hoy. Así que un aplauso fuerte para...
Maybe I go and sleep. It's 1 a.m. there.
Good night for you, Purva, Suji. Get some rest, please.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for your
15 minutes. Yeah. Okay, it's on. It's on. Oh, please,
So welcome back to is this our last panel?
Yes, for today.
Okay, for the last panel for today. The panel.
Put the microphone a little bit closer to you.
Is it better now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yes, so the panel is entitled Care Economy, Inclusion and Fair Trade. And we have, okay, I'm looking at the online screen. We have 6 wonderful papers. Do we have everyone online? Hope so. Yeah. So we have 6 wonderful papers, and I'm absolutely delighted to shepherd them through this session. We have agreed that each presenter would take about 12 minutes, and that would take about 72 minutes for the 6 of them. And that will leave us about 18 minutes to sort of have introductions and perhaps one question from the audience for each presenter. We'll take the questions at the end. I will ask the presenters to introduce themselves at the very beginning, just very, very briefly. Now, without being biased. Yeah. I think this is my favorite panel. And I tell you why.
Yes.
I think it's my favorite panel because these are issues that we haven't spent a lot of time discussing over the past several years, which were absolutely wonderful and very fruitful in terms of contributing to trade law and trade agreements and the discussion surrounding rules and regulations. But this is a topic that perhaps can move us forward, move us to the next level of making sure that trade becomes truly inclusive. So another reason why I absolutely love this panel is because the topics that we discuss have the opportunity and have a tendency to take us back to some of the fundamentals. So basically, what do we mean by care? What do we mean by inclusion? And what do we mean by fair? These are questions that also contribute to a little bit more to the qualitative side of discussing the trade agreements and trade activities. And perhaps more importantly, well, depending on which discipline you are researching it, perhaps more importantly, at least for some of us, the way we understand these things might also give us clues whether the different understandings change the way we understand the economy and how we understand trade moving forward. So I would like to open the floor and sort of go in the direction of the program. The first presenter is Laura Rolla. Do we have Laura?
Hi, Judith. Yes, it's all right. This is my surname. It's Rolia.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we basically agreed that everyone can present the way that they are most comfortable with. Some will use slides, some will not use slides. Are you using slides, Laura?
Yes, I will use them. So I have just one screen to show a quick view to a brevet of my CV. So I guess I'm presenting now, Judith. My presentation is written in Spanish, and also the content would be in Spanish, if everyone is okay, because I already prepared it this way. I will try to go on slowly so everyone can follow, right? Bueno, cambio a español. La presentación, como habían visto su nombre en inglés, tiene que ver justamente con el concepto de empoderamiento económico y cómo lo está incorporando desde 2017 la Organización Mundial del Comercio, WTO, y un poco el contraste con Mercosur. Así que, si les parece, doy comienzo. Aquí entonces mi presentación. Yo tengo un doctorado en Ciencias de la Comunicación y actualmente estoy terminando un segundo en Flaxo, Argentina, donde estoy vinculada con la cátedra de OMC, mi formación de base es Relaciones Internacionales por la Universidad de El Salvador, y soy investigadora en la UAI y en la UCES, así como coordinadora de proyectos de cooperación con sociedad civil. Lo que les decía entonces tiene que ver con estos hitos que todas y todos conocemos respecto de cómo la WTO está trabajando la temática de comercio y empoderamiento económico de las mujeres. Esto empieza en la Conferencia de Buenos Aires en 2017, se profundiza con el armado y puesta en funcionamiento del Grupo de Trabajo Informal sobre Género y Comercio, al que participan Estados miembros, luego con el desarrollo del Fondo WEIDE, que tiene que ver justamente con esta oportunidad de fondeo en economía digital para mujeres que lideran empresas, y finalmente este módulo de formación que arrancó este año con más de 600 personas capacitadas en los gobiernos. Esto creo que son los hitos que conocemos, pero que vale la pena repasar a la hora de pensar cómo el género ha entrado finalmente de manera más integral y clara en el trabajo de la OMC. Aquí el informe del año pasado sobre comercio justo e inclusividad. Vale decir que en cuanto a este componente de colectivos incluidos, las mujeres tienen un lugar central. Acá lo que estamos viendo justamente es una captura de este documento donde se hace referencia sobre todo a las MIPYMES, y este elemento es clave porque OMC, WTO, se centra justamente en las mujeres al frente de negocios, las mujeres que desarrollan empresas. Es el grupo que están visualizando sobre todo en el centro de las iniciativas. Acá, del mismo documento, justamente la proporción en la participación de empresas que exportan y aquellas con inversión extranjera directa, siempre mirando este tema de propiedad de las empresas y ese rol específico para las mujeres y la diferencia o brecha que vemos a nivel global. Este concepto también conocerán quienes en español o en inglés frecuentan la página de OMC, Ayuda para el Comercio, está definido ya desde hace un tiempo a partir justamente de... Perdón, escucho algo de fondo. ¿Puede ser el ruido de fondo de la sala? Judith, I don't know if we are giving echo or you hear me well, even if I'm talking Spanish, but I think it's okay, right?
No, solo traductores.
Okay, you are hearing me well there? It's clear for
Yes.
you? Okay,
Yes.
I continue. Thank you. So, en esta ayuda para el comercio vemos que la idea de la transversalización de las políticas públicas, que se define como entender los impactos diferentes para hombres y mujeres, en este caso estarían definidos en este componente de la ayuda para el comercio como parte de la misión de la WTO, la OMC. Un recurso clave que es el centro de investigación, yo acá pongo el ejemplo de mi país, en una organización en la que tuve la oportunidad de trabajar, que es un programa de sociedad de garantías recíprocas que ocurre en mi país, donde claramente se está mencionando este buscador disponible tanto en español como en inglés, y entiendo que en algunos de los otros idiomas oficiales también, para que se puedan encontrar todos los recursos disponibles que tienen de nuevo que ver con iniciativas de empresas lideradas por mujeres, como decía, es un poco el core business del trabajo de OMC en temas de género. Acá voy a un informe, el último de que se tiene disponible con estos datos respecto a los ACRs. Como este público sabe sin duda, se trata de los acuerdos comerciales regionales, como los nombra la OMC, que tienen justamente este derrotero de expansión, sobre todo y muy convenientemente a partir de los acuerdos de integración de los años 2000, la llamada marea rosa, que se extendió por nuestro continente, por América Latina, ayuda a traccionar, pero sin duda a partir de 2017, con esto que contábamos del cuadro de situación del impulso de OMC, y sin duda el rol específico de Chile como país precursor en la región de las iniciativas con enfoque de género en el comercio. Acá, 3 componentes muy rápidos para contar qué es lo importante en estas disposiciones que se incluyen en los acuerdos. Hay una amplia gama de cuestiones. El comercio suele estar asociado con estas temáticas que comentaba Judith al inicio, temas de cuidado, temas de accesibilidad de mujeres al mercado laboral y, por supuesto, en muchos de estos acuerdos también cuestiones vinculadas con discriminación y prevención de violencias. Un componente clave también respecto de cómo se piensan las políticas públicas, y aquí vemos un foco central en la cooperación. Aquí entendemos que muchos de los cambios que hemos tenido en los gobiernos de la región en temas de lineamiento político hacen que muchos países intenten integrar estas cláusulas como una forma de proteger los avances frente a las cuestiones justamente de transiciones en los procesos democráticos que tenemos en el continente. permanente. Y finalmente, estos seguimientos vinculados a la observancia y los mecanismos de resolución de diferencias que en general dejan por fuera las cuestiones de género, un poco como veíamos que pasaba con el acuerdo marco de 2017, porque la Declaración de Buenos Aires incluye el componente de género en el comercio como un elemento no obligatorio de firma del acuerdo. Acá, un poco para sintetizar estos hallazgos de esta última publicación disponible en el grupo de trabajo, que hace la cantidad de disposiciones, en qué cantidad de acuerdos de los firmados y un poco con qué contenidos. Y acá la síntesis, ¿no? Un 13 y un 12% que tienen impactos sobre las leyes internas, pero que también tienen un foco en esto que es la necesidad de información desglosada por género, que es el acuerdo de base que en general tienen los países respecto a los avances de la transversalización, y vemos que solo esos 5 disposiciones asignan partidas presupuestarias centrales que para quienes trabajamos en políticas públicas sabemos que los fondos son lo que definen de alguna manera el alcance y el impacto real esperado de una política. Acá de nuevo la centralidad de la cooperación, y me voy apurando con los slides para no dejar sin tiempo al resto del panel, pero ven que las medidas incluyen otros elementos como diálogo, intercambio de experiencias y solo en el último lugar la movilización de la que hablamos. Acá sí con el mapa vuelvo a la centralidad de Chile, más allá de que están anfitrionando la conferencia, pero no quiero dejar de destacar, seguro se conversa sobre esto durante todo el día de hoy y bueno, en la jornada de mañana, pero hay un derrame justamente de el trabajo que Chile ha venido sosteniendo para incluir estas disposiciones de género en el resto de los acuerdos. Obviamente eso tracciona también a Mercosur en el centro de la escena por el rol de Chile como Estado asociado. Acá tenemos entonces esta síntesis de los temas principales que ya había mencionado y obviamente la articulación con el tema de otras partes interesadas, no estatales, por ejemplo, se destaca sociedad civil, pero también, por supuesto, el sector privado y las prácticas de responsabilidad social, que entiendo también, volviendo a la referencia de Chile, están muy desarrolladas incluso respecto de la gestión de la política pública. Bueno, 2 directrices y herramientas aquí en el Mercosur, desde nuestro nacimiento en 1995, solo 5 años después, se adopta justamente la perspectiva de género en el ámbito y las directrices de la política de igualdad que ya tienen 11 años aquí mencionadas. Como última referencia institucional, les dejo por acá el documento más nuevo, que tiene 4 años, respecto sí de la autonomía económica de las mujeres en toda su diversidad. Quiero hacer la salvedad de que estamos por estos días en Argentina hablando de empoderamiento económico o autonomía de las mujeres como categoría aceptada a nivel de la política pública, y en este caso el Mercosur estaba justo en línea con esa apropiación ya unos años antes, con esta definición, pero me interesa destacar, como está remarcado abajo, que este resultado esperado de la adopción del instrumento tiene que ver, sí, con la recolección de datos y un trabajo similar a lo que propone en algún punto la OMC, pero sobre todo atendiendo a la diversidad, es decir, con lo que llamamos el componente de interseccionalidad, que se discute en distintos ámbitos del Mercosur y sobre todo la diversidad de roles, y acá volvemos a esto que había marcado Judith al inicio, no solo como empresarias o productoras y trabajadoras, sino el rol del cuidado y consumidoras de los sistemas resultantes del comercio. Acá simplemente mostrar esta evolución posterior, decía que el informe con el que había trabajado, con el desglose de las disposiciones en los acuerdos, tenía esta fecha 2022, así que ver que la tendencia creciente se mantuvo hasta incluso este año, en la cantidad de acuerdos que en nuestra región se siguieron generando, y luego una breve introducción a los instrumentos que se asocian a estos acuerdos comerciales regionales, como son la CEDAW, los convenios asociados con temática de género de la OIT, obviamente la Convención de Prevención de Violencias, la Declaración de Beijing, la citada Declaración de Buenos Aires de la OMC y obviamente el Objetivo de Desarrollo Sostenible 5 de la Agenda 2030. Ya nombré la centralidad del país de la región que nos acoge y los dejo con una rápida revisión de los textos, más allá de los elementos institucionales y obviamente recursos de cada OMC y de Mercosur. Aquí también referencia a los textos académicos y de discusión para poder dar seguimiento a la presentación. Muchas gracias.
Can you hear me, Laura? Oh, perfect.
Ready?
Can you hear me, Laura?
Stop sharing. Thank you, Judith. I think that questions will be at the end. So
Yes. Can you hear me, Laura?
Yes.
No. Oh, you can hear me now. Okay, good. Perfect. Yes, the questions are for the end. Perfect, thank you. So this was progress in mainstreaming gender in international trade, women's economic empowerment through the WTO and Mercosur. And now we have Olinda Sanchez for video. Is Olinda online?
Judith, Olinda had some issue in her agenda, so I think she would be at the end of the presentation.
Oh, okay, perfect. So she's here, she just has to come at the end. Okay.
Yeah. And I will be changing to my cell phones because I have to run now, but I will be here for the questions at the end. So thank you for your attention. I will be back.
If you disappear from the screen. Okay, yes. See you later then.
Yeah.
So the next paper is Carmen Amelia Corral Guerrero. Is Carmen online?
I'm seeing.
No?
Next.
No? No. Next. Oh my gosh, then maybe I should have just let Laura to talk for 5 hours. Okay, so our next wonderful paper is co-authored by 3 wonderful new scholars, Miriana Vignetti, Federica Maria Roiti, and Oriana Vignetti. Are you online?
Yes, Ariana is online.
Yes, here we are.
We are.
Perfect. Yeah, I can see you. So are you ready? The paper is Barriers to Women's Participation in Trade, Employment Prospects for Women Immigrants at the Madre Asunta Immigration Shelter in Tijuana. Ready? We are going to have 12 minutes.
Can you see the screen? We're sharing the presentation. Can you see it?
Yes.
Please, can you?
Yes.
Yes, and okay.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm so sorry. I have connection problem because I'm actually in Tijuana and we have electricity problems. Buenas tardes. My name is Miriana Vignetti, and together with my colleagues Federica Raiti and Arianna Vignetti, we will present our work on the barriers to women's participation in trade. We focus on the specific case of a migrant shelter for women and children in Tijuana, and we use the Brophenbrenner's ecological model to map the barriers faced by migrant women, and we see how these affect their participation in local and global economic chains. Next slide, please. Next. Okay, the model describes 5 systems that share how people develop, in this case, how migrants develop. For these studies, we examine 3 of them: the microsystem, the macrosystem, and the chronosystem. Next slide, please. Our sample includes 3,287 users. Less than half are women and the rest are children. The sample covers from 2021 to 2025. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk about the model and the first system, the microsystem. We identified 3 different microsystems for the migrant women, the family, the group of peers that is represented by the other migrants in the shelter, and the education. So about the family, we see that 75% of the women in the structure are not in a union, so are single, and 55% are mothers. And among mothers, 75% are single mothers. We can see how motherhood affects their length of stay. We see that mothers tend to stay significantly more in the shelter than non-mothers. Next slide, please. Okay, the next microsystem is the peer group, so it's the other migrants. We see that 70% are from Mexico, so we are talking about internal migration, and the others are from other countries as Honduras, Cuba, or Venezuela. Among them, around 70% are irregular or have no documents. This pushes them in a labor market without protections and with lower wages. Moreover, about the Mexican migrants, most of them are from regions as Michoacan or Guerrero, that are regions that are really poor and affected by a lot of violence due to the narco traffic. This violence is reflected in the primary drivers of migration that we see in the next slide. Okay, as we can see, around 70% of the women reported violence as the main reason for leaving. 75% is community violence, and around 23% is domestic violence. In the next slide, we see the last microsystem, that is the education environment. We see that around 60% of the women have a middle school level or below. And we also see clear differences between Mexican and non-Mexican migrants. On average, non-Mexican women have higher levels of education. And we can see in the specific that countries such as Cuba and Venezuela show particularly higher levels. This is consistent with the literature that we know. Now, Federica Raiti is going to talk about the macrosystem. Thank you.
Thank you. I will zoom out and start talking about and explaining the macrosystem, which is capture the broad structural forces that shapes migrants, women's living in Tijuana. In this talk sense, we analyze 3 elements interacting simultaneously: gender and community violence, regional migration drivers, and the effects of trade liberalization under NAFTA and the USMCA. So, firstly, gender-based violence in Mexico is deeply linked to the expansion of narco trafficking and organized crime. You see, criminal groups use gendered harm, such as feminicide, sexual exploitation, or threats to children as a tool of territorial control. This is a form of patriarchal violence, but it's not only incidental. It benefits from weak labor and also for weak labor protection, and also for fragmented migration governance. Border cities, such the one of Tijuana, are particularly affected because they sit at the intersection of trade corridors, migration routes, and criminal economies. Numbers says that over 1,200 women and girls sought protection in Mexico in 2024 alone, in many cases concentrated in strategic border hubs where organized crime and mobility converge. Sorry, okay, yeah. Secondly, we analyzed the regional drivers of occurrence in migration. So women migrants come especially from Central and South America. Women arriving in Tijuana disproportionately originate from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Venezuela. Across this country, coercive migration is shaped by a combination of domestic and community violence, gang control, and economic collapse. In fact, also trade restructuring has played a significant role. We analyzed these 4 countries as, for example, Guatemala having, after the NAFTA, a depressed small-scale agriculture, pushing indigenous people indeed into explosive and cross-border agriculture work in Mexico. We see El Salvador and Honduras, which are export-led competition, having export-led competition in which decline increased the feminization of precarious labor, while perceiving criminal governance forced many women to flee north. And in Venezuela, economic collapse exacerbated by oil market integration produced one of the world's largest displacement crises, with many women seeking safety and work in Mexican border cities as Tijuana. We see also that trade liberation has an effect on the Tijuana as a city, since we see that a shaped labor market in Tijuana, the city of maquiladora sector, producing for global supply chain, creates a persistent demand for low wages, flexible worker, and women migrants are disproportionately channeled into these jobs. This means that this segmentation is both structural and gender. Women are preferred for repetitive, tightly monitored tasks, and many accept these roles due to limited documentation, caregiving responsibility, and the need for predictable shifts in high urban environment. However, this association is weighted also with exposure to harassment, wage theft, and exploitation. At the same time, we have seen also that the trade liberalization, but also the trade regularization as the USMCA formally recognized this vulnerability, as, for example, the Article 23.8 obliged states to protect migrant workers, including women. But that's remained uneven, unfortunately, with a sharply decline, for example, on humanitarian visas by 97%. In fact, many women cannot work legally and become even more exposed to criminal extortion, trafficking network, and gender-based violence during both transit and settlement. I will leave the floor to Arianna.
Thank you, Federica, and thank you, Miriana. We are going to discuss the intersection of trade and female migration, a topic that has historically received literary scholarly attention. Traditionally, women were considered only wives or mothers, so basically family members, rather than independent labor migrants. As a consequence, this has hidden their significant contributions to labor market, even if we know that in many situations they were crucial to the development of the industrial sector, such as in the 1930s. In this period, a huge industrial expansion took place in Los Angeles, where the garment industry grew rapidly. There were around 634 garment factories by the end of 1939. This company employed nearly 16,000 workers, 75% of whom were women and girls from Mexico, basically from the southern border. So from a very early stage, female migrant labor was central to the development of this industry. However, despite their central role in the workforce, female migration remained invisible in research. We need to wait until 1986 with the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986 to see women migration in the academic studies. Trade agreements have also played a key role in shaping migration patterns. After NAFTA in 1994, as Federica said before, the collapse of a small-scale agriculture in Mexico forced many rural women to migrate simply to survive, while the expansion of maquilladoras along the northern border created precarious industrial jobs for basically young women. More recently, the 2020 USMCA has strengthened some labor protection in female-dominated manufacturing sectors, but unequal regional development still pushes, as Miriana told before, many women to migrate, especially in agriculture and dairy work. Next slide, please. Thank you. Our key findings points to a simple but uncomfortable conclusion. In Mexico and Tijuana, migration is survival, not upward mobility. It's not about self-improvement or people moving to unlock opportunities and climb the social ladder. They are not moving because they see attractive labor market, but because the structures around them are collapsing. economic insecurity, violence, environmental degradation, and the closure of safe and legal migration channels. In this context, migration becomes a way to stay alive, to protect their children, and secure a minimum income. This less a free choice among many options and more a last strategy when all the other options have already disappeared. Our second key finding is that Tijuana functions as a structurally coercive environment. Trade liberalization, violence, and weak enforcement of migrant labor protection intersects to create conditions where women are systematically pushed into low wages, highly flexible, and insecure jobs in basically export sector. Many of the women we study are not only workers, but also displaced persons, survivors of violence, or caregivers. Basically, they exist on paper in Tijuana and in Mexico, but access to justice, unions, and complaint mechanisms is extremely limited, especially for undocumented or newly arrived women with children. The third findings, at the same time, basically the migration toward northern Mexico with the hope crossing into the US has become a generalized and generational tradition for women and men. This means that in many families, migration is part of the expected life course, repeated across parents, siblings, and others, and so on. This tradition does not erase the violence and the exploitation attached to migration. It coexists with them. Women move despite being fully aware of the risks because the alternative often means remaining in place marked by poverty, control, and violence. So migration is not an extraordinary event, but part of ordinary life. It is socially normalized and repeated over generation. We wanted to highlight that these findings are not just descriptive. They have clearly implications for how migration and labor policies are designed and implemented. So, in the final part of this talk, we would like to outline some key policy implications that emerge from this research. First, trade policy must be gender sensitive. It is important to include gender-based anti-exploitation certification in maquillas, incorporation of gender consideration into USMCA labor chapters, and support for cross-border childcare training and safety initiatives. In Mexico, in particular, several private social responsibility schemes and multi-stakeholder initiatives are active, but none of these is a certification specifically designed to address gender-based exploitation in maquillas, or they are not structured as instruments for the collective empowerment of women workers. Second, migration should recognize gender drivers that push women to migrate and should invest in data collection and research that focus explicitly on the links between female migration and trade. Last but not least, without gender disaggregated data and solid empirical studies, policies will continue to be based on partial and male-centered narratives. In addition, it is important to ratify the ILO Convention C97 and C143, together with the effective implementation of migrant rights under the Ley Federal de Trabajo and the Ley de Migración is crucial to guarantee real protection and access to legal, decent work opportunities for non-Mexican migrant women. So it's important to facilitate access to these documents needs for non-Mexican migrant women to work legally. In conclusion, understanding female migration through the lens of trade and historical policy highlights both ongoing challenges and opportunity for reform. By integrating gender-sensitive approach in trade and migration policy, we can better protect and empower female migrants and ensuring that migration is a choice motivated by opportunity, not a necessity. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm looking at the screen, and do we have Carmen online now? No? No, okay. So we are going to turn to Viviana. Yes, so the fifth paper on our wonderful panel, but now you will be third. And hold on, I lost my. So please.
Hola a todos y todas. Mi nombre es Viviana Marín. Yo soy profesional en negocios y relaciones internacionales, especialista en justicia, víctimas y construcción de paz, y en Derecho Internacional y candidata a magíster en Derecho Internacional. Actualmente soy asesora en el Consejo de Bogotá, la entidad gubernamental que hace control político a la alcaldía en nuestra ciudad, y soy la secretaria política de la Juventud Comunista Colombiana en Bogotá. Y esto último lo señalo especialmente porque pues, mi militancia política traspasa cuál es el marco teórico de mi trabajo. Evidentemente, mi trabajo se titula Las cadenas, el papel de las cadenas globales del cuidado en la crisis del cuidado, un análisis desde la teoría marxista de la reproducción social. Debo pues empezar diciendo que este es mi trabajo de grado, que no es una tesis sino un artículo, y pues nace un poco de los intereses que he tenido en mi ejercicio militante por comprender lo que implica entonces la explotación de la mujer. Y una vez llego a mi maestría, pues me encuentro con que la teoría de la reproducción social va a encajar en muchas cosas del derecho internacional y del derecho económico internacional. Entonces esto hace que mi cabeza un poco explote así. Y bueno, en ese sentido, entonces quisiera pues dividir como en tres momentos esta presentación. La primera un poco en una presentación muy rápida de mi marco teórico. Intentaré no quedarme mucho ahí, aunque quisiera ser lo que más me quede, pero intentaré no hacerlo. En un segundo momento, una relación de este marco teórico con lo que son hoy conocidas como las cadenas globales del cuidado. Y finalmente lo aterrizaré a un caso que trae mi trabajo, que es el caso de las au pair, y pues finalmente serán las conclusiones. Entonces, para empezar, debo decir que este trabajo se sitúa en la comprensión o en la visión del mundo sobre, digamos, las crisis económicas constantes del capital y del capitalismo. Y esto es importante porque esa idea de las crisis económicas y de la crisis actual del capitalismo, entendiendo esta crisis como una crisis de la ganancia y de la acumulación, es decir, una crisis donde quienes son dueños del capital, quienes son dueños de las empresas, pues empiezan a ver reducida su ganancia y su acumulación, pues implica necesariamente que el capital camine a encontrar algunas formas de reinventarse para solventar su crisis. Y en este sentido, la forma en la que funciona el capitalismo y un poco en lo que han empezado a caminar las teóricas marxistas, pues es en desarrollar una forma en la que se explique muchísimo más la opresión de la mujer, y para esto se construye o empieza como a nacer la teoría de la reproducción social, que no es una teoría tan vieja realmente, sino pues es una discusión que van a tener algunas marxistas en los últimos años. Y la teoría de la reproducción social, yo siempre digo básicamente que la teoría de la reproducción social dice que las mujeres sostenemos el mundo. Pero para ser más enfáticos en la descripción de lo que es la teoría de la reproducción social, entonces esta teoría va a plantear...
Las pasas tú y no las pasas.
Se me olvida que... Entonces, la teoría de la reproducción social en autoras como Silvia Federici, de quien hablaban esta mañana, Nancy Fraser, Titi Bhattacharya, Cincia Arusa, o algunas un poco más latinoamericanas como Isabela Larguia y John Dumoulin, que de hecho para mí me parece que son quienes escriben más temprano sobre este tema, más o menos en el 75, pero no lo llaman teoría de la reproducción social, sino trabajo invisible. Pues van a plantear entonces que la teoría de la reproducción social y la reproducción entonces de la fuerza de trabajo va a tener tres momentos necesarios. El primero es la reproducción biológica, es decir, necesitamos más personas que nazcan y crezcan y empiecen a reproducir la fuerza de trabajo, empiecen a trabajar básicamente. El segundo plantea y pues lo van a llamar reproducción generacional. El segundo plantea la reproducción cotidiana, es decir, que todos los seres humanos necesitamos descansar, comer, tener ocio para tener fuerza para ir al trabajo. Entonces todos necesitamos ir a la casa a dormir, necesitamos ir a la casa a comer, necesitamos tener tiempo de descanso para poder volver a nuestras labores naturales y normales de todos los días. Y el tercero entonces plantea, el tercer momento de esta reproducción de la fuerza de trabajo, plantea la necesidad del cuidado de las nuevas generaciones o en general de las personas que no trabajan. Esto implica la crianza de niños y niñas que crezcan para posteriormente poder ir a trabajar, y también implica el cuidado de las personas mayores que ya pasaron su etapa laboral activa y que pues también empiezan a necesitar cuidados en cierto momento. Y bajo estos tres, digamos, herramientas o estos tres momentos, pues se plantea entonces que estos tres momentos se encuentran en lo que vamos a conocer dentro de la teoría de la reproducción social como la esfera de la reproducción, que va a ser distinta a lo que se conoce como la esfera de la producción. Y esta, digamos, tesis entre la diferencia entre la esfera de la producción y la reproducción, pues nace de lo que va a llamar Marx la acumulación originaria, que va a plantear entonces que en un momento, cuando pasamos del feudo al capital, hay una separación de estas dos esferas, y esa separación implica pues que ya no está el siervo en la tierra haciendo todo, en la casa y en la tierra, viviendo, reproduciendo la fuerza de trabajo, es decir, donde usted trabajaba, comía. Sino que vamos a empezar a ir a las fábricas porque el campesinado empieza a desplazarse en las ciudades y la reproducción la vamos a hacer en nuestros hogares. Pero los marxistas pues van a decir que evidentemente Marx se quedó un poco corto con esto y lo que va a plantear entonces es que esta división va a tener otro carácter. Y es que la reproducción, la esfera de la reproducción, entonces va a tener un carácter especialmente femenino y no asalariado, y la esfera de la producción va a tener un carácter masculino y asalariado en su mayoría. Sin embargo, el desarrollo un poco del capitalismo pues empieza a plantear que esta esfera de la reproducción, que realmente no está separada de la producción, porque para poder seguir produciendo cosas en nuestro planeta necesitamos que la reproducción siga funcionando. Por eso las preocupaciones tan fuertes sobre la baja tasa de natalidad no son en vano. No es porque nos guste tener tantos niños en el mundo, sino que a los países no les funciona porque no tenemos quien desarrolle posteriormente las labores o quien pague las pensiones y todo lo que implica tener nuevas generaciones. Pero este desarrollo entonces va a empezar a sacar el trabajo del cuidado simplemente de esa esfera que se ha llamado la esfera de privada, y lo va a plantear, sin ser un site le van a plantear que el trabajo del cuidado va a irse a otro, también a la esfera de la producción, quizás en tres momentos. El primero, con un trabajo que puede ser asalariado en sectores no productivos del espacio público, es decir, tenemos tareas de cuidado en el espacio público como los hospitales, los colegios, esos son escenarios del cuidado, pero que no representan una ganancia necesariamente porque son servicios públicos. El segundo, un trabajo asalariado en servicios personales o privados, que es un poco más todas estas empresas de servicios, de tareas de cuidado, o mujeres que trabajan en tareas de cuidado en casas ajenas, a quienes se les da un pago por esto. Y el tercero, un trabajo asalariado que sí genera cierta ganancia, como por ejemplo los restaurantes o el sector de la salud privado al que hay que pagarle esto. Y esto termina siendo importante porque es el punto en el que empieza a haber una mercantilización de lo que son las tareas de cuidado, y esa dinámica de mercantilización empieza a generar una contradicción entre el capital y las tareas de cuidado, y plantea entonces el punto neutral para lo que hoy se conoce o conocen las feministas como la crisis del cuidado, y es que el capital tiende a destruir las tareas de cuidado y el trabajo del cuidado. Lo mercantiliza, lo vuelve exclusivo porque solamente pueden acceder a él quien tiene dinero, y empieza a existir un vacío. Y esta característica de ese vacío se genera especialmente en la necesidad que empiezan a tener los países del norte global para cubrir esos vacíos de cuidado, que se empiezan a cubrir con mujeres que migran hacia el norte global. Entonces todos conocemos alguna mujer que ha migrado a hacer alguna tarea del cuidado hacia el norte global. Salimos de los países del sur y empezamos a ir al norte a lavar los platos, a cuidar niños y hacer todas esas tareas que normalmente las mujeres hacemos en nuestros países y en nuestras casas, pero ahora las vamos a hacer en el norte global. Y en este sentido, entonces, y entendiendo un poco la crisis del capital, es que aparecen, ya sé qué pasar eso, las cadenas globales del cuidado como una expresión de las cadenas globales del valor, en las cuales no me voy a detener porque ya esta mañana hablaron de algunas cosas de las cadenas globales del valor, pero solo quisiera añadir que pues mi trabajo entiende las cadenas globales del valor desde una perspectiva marxista, y eso implica que las entiende como un mecanismo central de capital para sostener la acumulación del mismo, es decir, para mantener esa explotación y esa acumulación de la plusvalía en el marco de la crisis. Y esta expresión entonces de las cadenas globales, es decir, como existe una necesidad del capitalismo de subsanar la crisis del capital de la ganancia, aparecen las cadenas globales del valor. Como tenemos una crisis del cuidado, pues necesitamos una herramienta que subsane entonces la crisis que tenemos hoy del cuidado, y aparecen las cadenas globales del valor. Pero yo en mi consideración, del cuidado, perdón, pero en mi consideración, las cadenas globales del cuidado, si bien aparecen, digamos, como una expresión que a veces parece muy gaseosa, si uno no la puede detallar tanto como podría detallar una cadena global, no sé, la cadena global de Nike. Uno puede decir, la fragmentación es esta, y en este país se cose, en este país se imprime, en este país se hace la publicidad, pero las cadenas globales del cuidado, en mi consideración, no son tan fáciles de situar, porque no siempre hay empresas intermediarias que nos permita decir, bueno, en este país se hace una cosa, en este país se hace otra, y ese vacío, digamos así, en el que no es tan cuantificable o tan visible qué tipo de cadena o cómo está construida, me hizo a mí entonces empezar a buscar si existía algún ejemplo de una cadena mucho más real del cuidado, teniendo en cuenta que estas cadenas globales del cuidado pues están muy marcadas obviamente en el ejercicio de la migración y por entramados de explotación muy fuertes, es decir, las mujeres que tienen que emigrar de nuestros países, especialmente del sur a el norte global, pues se encuentran muy explotadas con salarios muy bajos, especialmente porque muchas de estas migraciones son ilegales. Entonces, en el ejercicio de la ilegalidad, los salarios son muchísimo más bajos. Y en esa búsqueda de darle como una materialidad más grande a las cadenas, encontré un ejemplo, ya acabé, pucha, voy a terminar con esto rápido, un ejemplo en términos de que puede ser algo mucho más concreto, y es el tema de las au pairs. Las au pairs, aunque pareciera o se vende como un intercambio cultural en el que nosotras viajamos a un escenario cultural totalmente distinto, pues la realidad es que termina siendo una cadena global del cuidado muchísimo más explotadora. Y aquí yo desarrollo una categoría que hemos desarrollado con algunos compañeros y compañeras, que es la categoría de la mistificación o más que el trabajo mistificado, la subordinación mistificada, que plantea cómo se presenta el programa de las au pair como una cosa, la mistificación en Marx plantea como algo que no es real, se muestra ante los ojos del ser humano. Y en ese sentido, entonces, ¿cómo se muestran estos programas de las au pair? Con la idea de que son un intercambio cultural, pero en realidad su entramado detrás es que esto es un trabajo de cadenas globales del cuidado, y esta cadena sí es mucho más material, es decir, se puede ver como la persona que está buscando una familia, la empresa intermediaria que cobra, digamos, a la familia que está buscando una persona que le cuide sus hijos, y especialmente un entramado en la esfera de los estados, en la esfera de los estados, que quiero hacer solamente énfasis en esto para concluir, y es que los estados entonces tienen un papel muy importante porque pues esta cadena no es ilegal, y esa legalidad implica que hay tratados de libre comercio que permiten el tránsito de personas muchísimo más fácil. Y para poner un ejemplo, solamente en Estados Unidos existe una modalidad de visas para personas que son au pair, ¿sí? Que es la J1. Y bueno, aquí hay como unas cifras que espero en algún momento lo puedan revisar, que muestran eso. Entonces, para concluir, yo quisiera señalar que, digamos que evidentemente un poco en la respuesta a mi trabajo plantea que las cadenas globales del cuidado son entonces una herramienta que utiliza el capital para poder salir de la crisis del cuidado que tenemos, pero que realmente no termina sirviendo de a muchos, sino terminas generando muchísimos más escenarios de explotación y sobre todo una fosilización de los roles de género en los que nos encontramos las mujeres en términos de la economía del cuidado. Perdón por decir.
Perfecto.
Do we have Carmen online? No. Is she, do you know, she answered the email, but she's not connected, so. Oh, okay, okay, so, Brendan. Brendan is connected. Yeah, yes, Brendan?
Yeah, hello.
Hello, Brendan, nice to hear you again, nice to see you. Oh, hi.
Glad to meet you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Can you confirm, can you hear me?
Scheduled for as the sixth presenter, but I guess if we get Carmen maybe online, then we'll have her as well later, and then Olinda, is Olinda? Yeah, she's connected. So, okay, so then Brendan and Olinda for sure. And Brendan, you have, nice to see you proposing, so Brendan is proposing a gender-responsive trade corridor model for inclusive transit and trade facilitation. Lessons from West Africa's Summit Craig and oh, my glasses are not good enough. A flower border corridor for global practice. And I believe I've heard bits and pieces of this earlier. So Brendan, the floor is yours. You've got 12 minutes.
Oh, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and also the distinguished speakers for their insightful presentation. My name is Brendan Chukwuebuka Ugu. I'm a trade policy researcher and the founder of the Young African Policy Research Hub. So because of the time limit, I won't be able to share my slides. I will speak directly to the topic. So my topic is proposing a gender-responsive trade corridor model, GRTCM, for inclusive trade, transit, and trade facilitation. So, and I'll be drawing lessons from West Africa's Seme-Kreke border, which is a border between Nigeria and Republic of Benin, and Aflao border, which is a corridor between Ghana and Togo for global practice. So, within the West Africa trade ecosystem, especially within the transit system, you will discover that the transit system are overwhelmingly designed, just like other jurisdictions, overwhelmingly designed to prioritize the rapid movement of goods. But the real question of my paper is not whether our corridors are efficient for goods, but it is whether they are just safe and inclusive for women who sustain cross-border trade every day. So the hidden reality remains that between 60 to 70% of cross-border trade users in West Africa are largely women who trade along these corridors, not just as traders, but as truck drivers, entrepreneurs, and also as nursing mothers whose their needs and concerns are largely missing in trade transit laws and trade governance, regulating corridors within the West Africa. So consequently, many women, cross-border women traders, flying through these corridors remain unsafe, hostile, and exclusionary for women who use them every day. So it is in response to this gap that I propose the Gender Responsive Trade Corridor Model, GRTCM, and this model is built around 4 pillars of consensus and intervention for trade corridors governance, not just to work for cargo, but for women traders. So the first pillar centers around the policy and legal integration, the gaps in transit law. So the problem in West Africa and also in some other jurisdictions in developing countries remains the absence of the transit laws and policy remain gender blind. By this I mean that they are designed without women in mind. I mean there are no explicit protection clause in transit laws for female drivers. For example, within ECOWAS, we have what we call the ECOWAS. ECOWAS is Community of West African Community, is a regional trade group or trade bloc. So, and we have trade laws, community transit acts, national customs, and transit laws, bilateral corridor agreements, which regulate vehicle, cargo, documents, routes, and fees without safeguard for women. So, and this explained recently what happened in Nigeria. I was speaking with the president of Association of Women Drivers, popularly known as Ladies on Wheel, where she shared an experience which exposes the legal gap in our transit system. So that was a case of a certified female truck driver with all her valid transit documents was driving across the border, across the African border corridors. So at the border, she was stopped, not because her papers were incomplete and not because her cargo was illegal, but because she was a woman. So it was surprising to see a woman, being a truck driver. And that moment captures what gender blind laws look like in real life. So the law protects the truck, the law protects the cargo, the law protects the transit document, but the law does not protect women, especially women in logistics, especially those that operate as truck drivers. So because there is no extant legal clause protecting women, female truck drivers, so this becomes a gap and a concern for in trade transit governance. So the question becomes, to what extent are global trade rules protect women in logistics, especially the emerging trend of women as truck drivers? So, and the second pillar of my of the GRTC model is centers around the infrastructural gap within the transit corridors. So let me move to the second point, which remains, that is the infrastructural gap. So the regional agreements, such as the African Continental Free Trade, also the National Trade Policy Document and Transit Policy Framework within the West African corridor, lack mandatory commitment to the provision of women-friendly infrastructure at the border. And by virtue of a woman, there are facilities that support women traders. Something like having a transit, a fast-track transit lane for small-scale women traders for fast clearance of their consignments. And there is also issue of noticeably absence of breastfeeding care rooms for nursing, for women traders that are also operate as nursing mothers. So in many cases, because of lack of because of lack of priority for investment in women facilities, women friendly facilities, it becomes a concern. And most of our laws, most of our policies lack mandatory commitments of member states to invest in women friendly facilities at the border. I had a recent consultation in one of the borders within the ECOWAS, within the Economic Community of West African States, and I saw firsthand where nursing mothers, that operate as cross-border traders, where because of lack of shelter, some of them were under trucks just as a cover. So, and this showed the reality of what is happening within the cross-border corridors. Lack of women-friendly facilities hinders cross-border operations within this area. And the third pillar has to do with institutional capacity and gender championship and grievance systems. So across many trade corridors, women traders have organized themselves in such a way that they have associations that serve as gender champions. as first responders for women at the border. But the questions and the problem becomes, the issue is that most of these women cross-border trade associations, virtually all of them, are not recognized. They are not given recognition, even institutional border management structure. And a situation whereby the women traders, women cross-border trade associations are not recognized in the transit management system, then it evidently shows that their needs and priorities and concerns will not be captured in transit governance. And that is why some of our border trade corridor borders remains gender blind, not taking the priority and the concerns of women in cross-border trade. So the fourth pillar centers around monitoring and evaluation with sex disaggregated data. Now, the question here is, to what extent do we record, even as our researchers, we find it very difficult to get data relating to women in transit, women in cross-border trade. The issue here is that laws and policies and initiatives are centered around collection of data on transit. We measure the clearance time. We measure cargo volumes. We measure the freight value collected. We measure truck turnaround. But the here is that we are measuring trucks better. We are measuring trucks far better than we are measuring people, especially women. So in most cases, all transit documents is recorded in the name of a company, which makes it difficult for you to know whether is a company a gender. Can you hear me? The data management system, the data collection system, are the gross. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
hello,
you're back now.
Okay, thank you so much. So in the area, the fourth pillar centers around data collection. So most of the challenges revolve around the way the data collection system is done. The data collection system is mostly designed in such a way that the cross-border operators are recorded in the name of the business with they trade, instead being recorded in maybe in Mrs. So and so. Then what you see is XYZ enterprises, making it very difficult for us to have the gender of the people that transit across borders, and that is why the issue of collecting gender disaggregated data at the transit corridors remain a problem and very difficult for you to capture. And a situation where you don't have data of women crossing transit routes, data of women as truck drivers, data of women operating as also nursing mothers, it becomes very difficult because most policies are evidence-based. They are made, is made based on the data. So it becomes very difficult for us to champion policies that speaks to the concern and the challenges affecting women in cross-border trade. So by the GRTC model, which is the essence of this paper, centers around 4 pillars. One is addressing the legal gap, making sure that that transit policies, transit framework captures the concerns of women. Then the 4th pillar has to do with the infrastructural gap. There should be mandatory investment priorities. There must be investment priorities should be included in our transit laws, and investment should prioritize women-friendly facilities. So, and the question here is, because of time, the question here is, what is the lesson for global practice? One is that the first thing is that corridor can be fast for cargo, but still unsafe for women. So efficiency here alone does not mean inclusion. So, and second thing that we have to also learn is that gender blind laws create real problem. When laws that protect the truck, when we have laws that protect us, but do not protect women, do not protect truck drivers, women truck drivers, it becomes, the discussion becomes legally, becomes silence. So every country must have an explicit gender protection in transit laws. And the
Can you see me, Brendan? Can you see me, Brendan? Okay, I think we are sort of running out of time.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right.
Can you just maybe find a way to wrap it up and then maybe?
Okay. All right.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes. So in summary, the gender responsive trade corridor model centers on 4-pillar intervention in policy issues. One is making sure that transit laws are gender, captures the priorities of women in transit. Then infrastructural gap, there should be a mandatory commitment of member states to invest in women-friendly facilities. And also, we should also focus on collecting gender disaggregated data at the transit corridor. And this can be made possible by ensuring that gender is also indicated. Thank you so much. Because of time, I will have to stop here. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
And now we have Belinda on the
Yes.
online.
Yes.
Yeah, so we spent a little bit more time on the papers, which actually we're doing perfectly because we have one fewer presenter online. So yeah, Belinda, are you there? Can I see you? Can I?
Yes, she's right there.
Olinda.
Sí.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Hi. Hello. Hola.
Oh, I can see you.
Buenas tardes.
Yeah, so you have 12 minutes. Welcome.
Okay. Ok, no sé si ahí puedan ver mi presentación.
Yes.
Ok, gracias. Buenas tardes con todos. La verdad es un gusto el poder estar acá, el poder presentar este trabajo relacionado a mi tesis doctoral, pues que está enfocado justamente en el comercio justo, en los avances y desafíos en la región andina. Ok, entonces, en función del tiempo, hablamos dentro de América Latina y el Caribe, que de acuerdo con el informe regional de Fair Trade al 2025, las organizaciones de productores representan el 48% de todas las organizaciones certificadas a nivel mundial. De estas, cerca de 309,000 personas entre agricultores y trabajadores representan aproximadamente el 16% del total mundial dentro del sistema Fair Trade. Los productos significativos o claves dentro de este comercio justo pues son justamente el café, el banano, el cacao y la caña de azúcar. De los cuatro, el más representativo o el que mayor consumo tiene por parte de las personas es el café. Pero el comercio justo no es solamente café, cacao, banano o caña de azúcar. También existen otros productos como otras frutas, jugos, textiles y artesanías que también deben ser apreciados y que también deben ser conocidos. Si lo vemos ya desde el punto de vista de la prima que se genera dentro de los países y cómo llega esta prima a los países, vemos que Perú, dentro de la región, es uno de los países que se queda con el mayor porcentaje de esta prima, ¿no? Con un 24%, Colombia lo hace en un 17%, estando en segundo lugar, y para efectos de mi país, Ecuador, se encuentra en el quinto lugar, reteniendo una prima de comercio justo que alcanza el 8% dentro de la región. Si lo vemos ya desde el punto de vista de los productos claves dentro del sistema de comercio justo, tenemos los productos insignes que ya les había mencionado, en el cual pues se hace la distinción entre los productos orgánicos y los productos convencionales. En estos productos, los que más destacan son la producción orgánica. En el caso del cacao, quien lidera es República Dominicana, con mayor porcentaje de toneladas métricas, mayor número de toneladas métricas, y Ecuador pues se encuentra en tercer lugar, ¿no? En el cacao lidera en cambio Perú, en cuanto a bananas lidera República Dominicana asimismo, y en cuanto a flores, plantas, tés de hierbas y todos estos productos relacionados, lidera mi país, Ecuador. En cuanto a otro tipo de productos, ¿verdad? En este caso la caña de azúcar se destaca porque a diferencia de los otros productos, esto va a la inversa, ¿no? Lo que destaca acá es la producción no convencional, ¿ya? Es decir, la producción que no es orgánica, sino la producción tradicional, ¿no? De estos, el país que lidera es Paraguay. Si hablamos ya en el caso de las mujeres que trabajan, o el porcentaje de mujeres que contribuye como campesinas, como trabajadoras dentro de las fincas de comercio justo, por productos, los cereales, las flores y las frutas frescas es donde mayor participación de las mujeres existe. Mientras que en la producción de miel, las apícolas, lo que son la producción de tés, de hierbas y en lo que es la minería, ¿verdad? La participación de las mujeres, obviamente, por ser actividades más riesgosas, tiende a disminuir. Si nos enfocamos ya en la región andina, en los 4 países que lo integran, Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador y Perú, según datos de la Coordinadora Latinoamericana de Comercio Justo, CLAP, al 2025, existen un total de 454 organizaciones de pequeños productores y 95 plantaciones certificadas. De entre estos, los productos que se destacan mayormente dentro de los 4 países son cacao, banano, caña de azúcar y café. Para el caso de Bolivia, se adicionan también la quinoa y la nuez. Para el caso de Colombia, estos 4 productos que ya había mencionado. Para el caso de Ecuador, destacamos también lo que es la producción de quinoa, del banano orito y de las flores. Y para el caso de Perú, su producción es mucho más diversificada y también se incluye la producción tanto de espárragos, de granadillas, de mangos y de aguacates. ¿Cuáles son las iniciativas de comercio justo dentro de la región andina? Estas van encaminadas justamente a 3 dimensiones específicas, que son la gestión e incidencia, priorizando el apoyo a pequeños productores a través de programas universitarios y gubernamentales, la inclusión de jóvenes, que estableciendo comités nacionales de jóvenes para el comercio justo en varios países, y también el apoyo o la lucha contra el cambio climático a través de la conservación ambiental, ¿no? Construyendo estas alianzas que permitan la conservación de las fuentes hídricas y de los sistemas agroecológicos. Es así entonces como tenemos iniciativas como Ciudades y Pueblos por el Comercio Justo o el de las Universidades Latinoamericanas por el Comercio Justo, que busca justamente que los jóvenes puedan insertarse dentro de estas iniciativas dentro de la región. En el caso de los emprendedores, se busca también posicionarlos a través de las compras públicas y también a través de la comunidad andina, de la CAM. Se trabaja en referencia al Acuerdo de Cartagena, que establece como objetivo el desarrollo equilibrado y armónico, en una estrategia que va encaminada justamente y que se realiza anualmente, que es el Encuentro Andino Anual, que busca justamente impulsar la internacionalización de los emprendedores, de las pymes, y también la generación de oportunidades de negocios, ¿no? Dentro de los desafíos que todavía tenemos como región, bueno, destacaré para este espacio algunos de los más importantes, ¿no? Entre ellos, pues, el apoyar innovaciones en sectores no tradicionales, ¿no? Ya que todavía seguimos creyendo que el comercio justo se limita únicamente a café o a cacao y, como lo hemos visto, pues, no solamente es café y cacao, sino que existen otros productos que también se producen dentro del sistema. Otro es poder visibilizar y fortalecer los liderazgos femeninos, ya que las mujeres son las principales productoras, pero a la vez las menos visibilizadas, ¿no? Otro de los desafíos que tenemos como región es poder proponer nuevas métricas de sostenibilidad económica, ya que el precio justo no siempre significa ingresos dignos ni una calidad de vida para los pequeños productores, ¿no? No siempre se cubren los costos reales de producción que les asegure a ellos una calidad de vida. Además, es necesario poder también encaminar nuestros esfuerzos hacia la combinación con otras disciplinas alternativas. Llámense economía social, economía circular, agroecología o la migración hacia formas y hacia la transición verde, ¿no? Ya que el impacto ambiental del comercio justo está siendo subestimado y obviamente esto le afecta no solamente al sistema, sino también al planeta. Finalmente, el desafío que creo que es el más importante de todos los que he mencionado es justamente a nivel local el poder diseñar mercados o ferias que beneficien a las comunidades de origen, ¿no? Porque el consumo local del comercio justo es mínimo. Existe una desconexión a nivel cultural y a nivel económico de los ciudadanos de los países de la región con sus productos locales. Aprender a amar lo que se tiene dentro del país para luego amarlo de afuera, ¿no? Finalmente, y como conclusiones, considero que la región andina se encuentra ya en un punto de inflexión, en donde le es necesario, meritorio, el poder articular estas tres grandes dimensiones: género, transición verde y obviamente la viabilidad económica, que es la que nos va a permitir poder avanzar hacia un comercio que sea verdaderamente inclusivo, que sea sostenible en el tiempo, sostenible económicamente y que además pues debe ir en consonancia con los compromisos de la integración regional, pero además con las normativas que nos plantea la OMC. Eso es todo, les agradezco por la oportunidad. Buenas tardes.
Thank you. That was early. Thank you for the presentation. That was wonderful. Okay. We have like 5 minutes left. So how should we use these?
Maybe
1 or 2 questions maximum, or like a last statement by the. Oh, no. So we had 5 presenters, 5 wonderful papers, and we have 5 minutes. Okay, or a minute each, or maybe just, does anyone have like 1 super question? I sort of have a question.
Oh, you should. Then that should be the final question at the end. Yeah, final question.
Okay.
You want to pick
It's just somehow, maybe it's way too complex. Not the question, the answers, the potential answers. So these are wonderful papers and they're very complex issues. So the question I would have is, what exactly would you like to see in trade agreements that would help the circumstances that you are looking at? And this is sort of unfair 5 minutes before reception. But that was a question that was always at the back of my mind. Anyone would like to? Yeah.
Bueno, de hecho, esta es como una de preguntas como, digamos, también un intento de las conclusiones que intento hacer en mi trabajo y es una necesidad, por lo menos en el caso de las au pair, la necesidad de un reconocimiento de los países de lo mismo como trabajo. Es decir, la mayor problemática es que la forma en la que migran y estas cadenas de cuidado no son reconocidas como trabajo, sino son formas de migrar reconocidas como intercambios culturales. Entonces, en tanto no reconocemos en ningún lugar que son trabajos, a excepción de Finlandia, que no permite la misma regulación, sino plantea que esto es un trabajo y por ende les deben pagar los salarios mínimos, la seguridad social y todos estos escenarios. Creo que por lo menos en el ámbito de este tipo de programas hay una necesidad de que los países legislen reconociendo lo que es. Porque cuando no lo reconocemos como trabajo, pues evidentemente su tratamiento es totalmente distinto y permite mayores tipos de precarización a las mujeres que migran de esta forma. Entonces, por lo menos en estos términos, creo que es necesario que los estados en sus ejercicios y las organizaciones internacionales puedan realmente plantear este ejercicio como una migración laboral, reconociendo en sus visas, por ejemplo, que son permisos de trabajo, no permisos de intercambio cultural, no permisos de estudio, y eso pues debe plantear entonces un accionar de las políticas internas que permitan que este tipo de personas tengan realmente derechos laborales en estos países, porque muchas son víctimas de explotación y sobreexplotación de las familias de acogida a donde llegan. Entonces creo que esto sería importante.
Anyone else would like to tackle that from? Yeah. Yeah.
Sí.
Hold on. Yes.
Wait. This is actually an issue I've been thinking about. How could we tackle this? And one way might be to include the provision of care system of care work as a mode for trade and services commitment. I mean, I know this isn't what people think about when they consider mode 4 in trade and services. And well, if we want to do some novel, original thinking, why not try that? To put it sort of in MPA terms.
Yeah. Did I see other hands here? Yeah, okay. Well, I'm being told that there's wine out there. So we can go and discuss.
Not everyone, Chilean.
Yes. Oh, well, Chilean wine. So, yes. Thank you for the presenters. Thank you very much for being online with us and staying up if wherever you are. I'm sure that for some of you it's really late in the day. So, thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Muchas gracias.
Bye.
Bye.
Buenos días a todos. Gracias.
Gracias.